Now 6:37. This is a regular meeting of March 14th, 2018. And as a reminder, if you would like to speak before the council tonight, please complete a blue speaker request form and give it to the clerk prior to the item. Those can be found on the front table in the back there. This time we're moving to roll call. Mr. Aguilar.
Councilmember Platt. It will be marked absent. Councilmember Tassari.
Here.
Councilmember Rush.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Rigby.
Here.
Mayor Lormore.
Here. All right. Tonight's invocation will be presented by Pastor Dennis Morales of Calvary Chapel, Eastvale. Sir, welcome.
Good afternoon. Good to be here. I think it's only appropriate that we lift Pastor Jim Willoughby and his family. He was supposed to be here, so I'm standing in for him. His wife passed away tragically suddenly last week, so I'd like to lift him up also. Heavenly Father, we just thank you for today. We lift up the Willoughby family, and we just pray that your hand be upon them in this tragic circumstance, Lord. And we know, Lord, that you're in control. We just grant them peace and strength during this time. We thank you for the ministry and for their influence here in the city of Eastvale. We just pray that you continue to be with Jim and his family. We just thank you, Lord, for our time to come together as a community to seek what's best for our great city of Eastvale, Lord. And we thank you for making our city one of the best places to live in the United States, Lord God. But we know and we understand that it's going to take more hard work and dedication to keep our status. We thank you, Lord, for all those that are hard at work in our city, Lord, especially our mayor pro tem, our city council members, city staff, community leaders, Lord. We pray, Lord, that they continue in the spirit of strength and wisdom as they seek to keep our city great and moving in fortitude and prosperity, Lord. We pray, Lord, for our public safety, for our first responders. We pray that you grant them special protection, Lord. We pray for our troops, Lord God, grant them special grace and protection. And as we come before you today, we invoke your presence here. We ask for your guidance and wisdom and support as we begin this meeting. Help us to engage in meaningful discussion, to dwell in the spirit of understanding, to build bridges, refurbish intents, Lord, and allow us to grow closer as a city nurturing bonds of community, Lord. We pray, Lord, and we continue, Lord, to be reminded of what we do here today, Lord, is for your glory and for the best of our community, Lord. We just thank you, Lord, for all that you seek to accomplish. We pray, Lord, that we may continue just to pursue truth, Lord, and pursue that unity, that bond of unity, Lord, and something that's greater than just ourselves, Lord. We thank you, Lord, for the fact that we can do all things through you who strengthen us. We thank you for this time, and we give you all glory and all praise. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Pastor Morales. All right, the Pledge of Allegiance tonight will be led by Mayor Pro Tem Rigby.
Please stand and move your hats and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready? Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we are now at the additions and revisions portion of the agenda. The council may only add an item to the agenda after making a finding that there is a need to take immediate action on the item and that the item came to the attention of the agency subsequent to the posting of the agenda. An action adding an item to the agenda requires a majority vote of the council. Do we have any of those? Any additions? Well, that'll be a revision, yes. Do we have any additions?
There are no additions at this time, Mayor.
Okay, excellent. Does anybody have anything they would like to move around at this time? Okay, there was a suggestion on the public hearing item 8.2 that will be continued, that we hear that item first prior to item 8.1. I would like to make that revision to the agenda. Has there been any other revisions? Stephen?
No, none at this time.
Okay. All right. So we don't have any, we don't need to have a vote on that revision, do we?
No.
No, okay. Excellent. Moving on to item number 4, presentations and announcements. So item 4.1 is a complete streets safety assessment presentation by Supervising Engineer Craig Bradshaw. Mr. Bradshaw.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the City Council. I'm going to run through this. This is a little bit lengthy, but be sure to stop me if you have questions. This complete streets, is this working? Whoops. Stephen, is this working or doesn't appear to be? Or is it? Okay. All right. I think we're good. We received this Office of Traffic Safety grant, Complete Street Safety Assessment, due to a study that was performed by the Office of Traffic Safety, and we applied for the grant. This is through the Institute of Transportation Studies at UC Berkeley. They provide a lot of the transportation planning in California, and they coordinate a lot of these studies. There were two traffic safety experts, licensed traffic engineer, traffic enforcement expert, and they spent a lot of time looking at our data, looking at our documents, our speed surveys, and so forth. And they came into our city and interviewed us and spent some time driving around the town to make the recommendation. I shouldn't say recommendation, to make the suggestions. They're very careful in saying these are suggestions and not recommendations for liability reasons. And a lot of these things, depending on the engineering study and understanding more background, they may or may not be appropriate. But the whole objective of this study is to improve motorist, bicycle, and pedestrian safety in the city of Eastvale. And being a fairly new city, this was something we felt was really needed at this time. We've grown very fast. We have a very young population. This is just some of the information that they looked through in preparing this report. This is Eastvale's Office of Transportation Studies ranking of ped and bikes. This is one of the reasons that we received this grant. This gives the various different pedestrian and bike breakdown as far as accidents are concerned, how we rank with other cities. There's 102 cities in our demographic. And so if you look in the upper left corner, for 2011, we ranked 100 out of 102 cities, which means we ranked quite well out of the 102 cities. We're right near the top as far as safety is concerned for pedestrians in general. Now, if you go down to the next line, it's pedestrians less than 15 years old. You notice the numbers drop because we have a fairly young city. In 2011, we were ranked 85th out of 102 cities. And in 2014, we dropped to 62 out of 105 cities. That's a little bit concerning. Pedestrians 65 plus, 2011 it's 67, and then we jumped up to 95 out of 105. So much better in 2014 than in 2011. Bicyclists, this is just overall, we were 94 out of 102 in 2011. And in 2014, it dropped to 60 over 105. Okay, this is where things really jump out at us. Bicyclists less than 15 years old. In 2011, as far as ranking among the 102 cities, we were 51st out of 102. And then in 2014, we dropped to 9th out of 105 cities. There's 105 cities in the demographic. So we're like the 9th worst city as far as bicycle accidents. And these data sets are not real large. They're derived using SWTR's data. And SWTR's is a statewide integrated transportation reporting system. And just formal reports that are written up in the SWTR's format get reported. So there's a lot of things that don't get reported also, but the data sets are not real large, and so this data can be skewed fairly easily. This shows pedestrian traffic collisions by day of week. But all you can gather from this is most of the accidents occurred during the school week. Pretty straightforward. This is by hour of day, before school and after schools when we have most of the accidents. Pretty straightforward data. There's some points that were made after they reviewed this data. Of all the Eastville pedestrian collisions, 50% were the pedestrian's fault, and that's based on the report that was filed. 6% of all pedestrian collisions occurred within crosswalks. And we were in the process of enhancing crosswalks. The crosswalks will stand out more. The two most common violations were vehicles failing to yield to pedestrians within a crosswalk. This is typically the right turn into the crosswalk area, and pedestrians failing to yield to vehicles mid-block. These two violations comprise about 46% of all the cases of all the causes of pedestrians involved in collisions. The highest amount of pedestrian collisions occurred along Scholar Way corridor. So some of these things are not real surprising if you drive the streets and you're taking kids to school and you walk those streets. The average distance mid-block pedestrian was struck, I believe it was just 50 feet from an intersection. So people are crossing just before the intersection. Okay. There were 11 pedestrian traffic collisions resulting in serious injury that occurred in Eastville in the past 3 years, and they're looking at 2014 to 2016 in this data set. Pedestrians were determined to be at fault 5 of the collisions. Most of the collisions happen during the typical commuter periods, and usually it's during school periods. Okay, and we see very similar types of data with bicycle accidents. Most of the bicycle accidents occur during the school week, Monday through Friday. For some reason, Tuesdays and Thursdays tend to be larger for both bicyclists and pedestrians. I'm not sure why that is, but we're dealing with very small data sets again. And again, most of the bicycle accidents occur just before school and just after school. Okay, and the points that can be pulled out of the bicycle information is 78% of the bicycle collisions are mid-block. They're not at intersections. Of the 48 bicycle collisions, 54% of the time the cyclist was at fault. And the most frequent roadway where bicycle collisions occurred were, I believe that's Scholar Way. Okay. And this is just a breakdown for the past 3 years. And the reason that it ends at 2016 is because it takes almost a year for the SWITRs to catch up, or it can take a half a year or 3/4 of a year for the SWITRs information to catch up. And this work was done in 2017. This data was pulled together about June of 2017. At Scholar Way, there's 7 collisions, Schleichman 5, Limonite Avenue 3 collisions, Hamner 3 collisions, Citrus 3 collisions.
Mr. Bradshaw?
Yes.
Really quickly. On those, were there, what cross streets? Do we know?
Yes, actually the data gives all the detail, but it's so small for me to throw up here, and there's so much detail.
Okay.
But yeah, it's really kind of scattered around.
Okay.
There are some intersections you wouldn't be surprised at all.
Right.
Orange and Scholar, I think, is one of them. And there's some intersections that you're going, why was there an accident there?
Okay, excellent. Thank you, sir.
There's a number of things that they go through as far as ensure that we're important traffic engineering items that they go through. They checked in to see that we maintain the following: a bicycle master plan, which we have. We have speed feedback signs. This was they did this just before we installed all the additional speed feedback signs in the city. Flashing beacons at uncontrolled crosswalks. We have a couple of those. School zones being properly signed. And we have a future program for countdown pedestrian indicators. We have an HSIP grant. We're working through the process for the federal requirements for the paperwork for doing countdown pedestrian indicators throughout the city. We have a good use of the 12-inch signal heads and back plates. Most of our city is fairly new, so a lot of these traffic signal items I believe almost all of them are up to date. Fully protected left turn phases at many locations, a good relationship with the police department, access ramps with the tactile domes at most intersections. That's one of the items that we're updating regularly when we resurface, is adding the tactile domes at the crosswalks. clearly visible markings to provide guidance to drivers on major streets. So we're doing the majority of the things that they were looking for, or we have included in our program. And there's 5 corridors that they looked at specifically on 65th Street, Scholar Way, Harrison, Schleichman, and Archibald. The first 3, 65th Scholar and Harrison, were subject of a ATP grant. That's Active Transportation Program grant last year, where we were looking at doing some complete street implementations, which involve a reduction of lanes, separating out bicyclists, a number of different things. We were not successful. That program is coming up again, and we're reevaluating whether to apply for that grant and restructuring it. During the past year, Harrison Avenue was added to WRCOG's list of regional bike trails. We believe that's going to help us get funding for Harrison. It ties us to bike trails to the north in Ontario, and ties us to the Santa Ana River Trail. So Harrison's really a prime location for improvements to improve the pedestrians and bicycle ways through that area. They gave a number of comments regarding short-term, medium-term, and long-term ideas on how to improve safety for bicyclists and pedestrians. The high visibility crosswalks, we've been working on that, and you'll be seeing those throughout most of the city. Some traffic signal considerations, allowing pedestrians to cross the street before allowing right-hand turning motorists to cross the crosswalk. They suggested implementing a no right turn on red for eastbound 65th Street at Harrison. And that again, that's the pedestrian crossing issue and cars making the right turn at that location. We've implemented a number of those no right turn on reds at Schleichman and Harrison. And you see those, and many people, when it's not during school period, wonder, why does it say no right turn on red? Well, they're installed because there's a problem with pedestrian accidents and cars making a right turn into pedestrians. And installing, upgrading the pedestrian warning signs to fluorescent yellow-green. That's something that we will be looking at. Installing speed feedback signs, that's something we have done fairly recently. They're implementing green bicycle lane markings in conflict area with right turning vehicles. When we implement bike lanes, particularly when we're doing complete streets, this is important so that bicyclists and motorists recognize there's a potential area of conflict. Reviewing yellow change intervals, and all of our signals are in accordance with the yellow change intervals and red clearance intervals in the city. Medium term, bike detection. Many of our intersections, we do pick up the bicyclists with, we have opticons that are video that pick up the bicyclists. In our busy streets, that's typically not a problem because of the number of motorists. These are suggestions really for complete streets, installing temporary curb extensions with plastic bollards at signalized intersections adjacent to schools. Again, trying to control the traffic and where they're turning movements, implementing right turn overlap phases for existing right turn lanes, and northbound Archibald Avenue to eastbound 65th. Again, this is trying to prevent cars turning through the crosswalks when pedestrians are present. Long term, removing traffic lanes and implementing buffered bike lanes, or Class 4 bike lanes. Class 4 bike lanes is where you physically separate the bike lane from the roadway by the use of either bollards or some type of curbing. Removing traffic lanes and installing angled parking. This is one concept we've looked at. That's a whole nother issue we'll have to delve into when we're going through the striping on 65th Street. Installing raised medians to narrow roadway. Installing curb extensions to reduce crossing distances and speed of turning vehicles. Okay, and part of this analysis also looked at police enforcement, and the Sheriff's Department many of the things they're currently doing, the education, the bicycle rodeos and so forth. There's really quite a bit of information. It also includes an appendix that goes through many of it's a toolbox that gives you ideas and suggestions and ways of implementing Complete Streets. And Complete Streets is a huge topic. We spent 2 hours with WRCOG for some training last week. I know County of Los Angeles has a 3-day course they present. There's a lot of information, and we'll delve into that fairly quickly. And this looks way too small for you to see it. Basically, it's showing the likelihood of death versus speed, being hit by a car. Basically, and they have younger average age, and I think older aged people. It ranges from about 3% to about, I believe it's 12% likelihood of death at 20 miles an hour. And so as far as actually being killed in a car accident by a car going 20 miles an hour, it's very low. Now, if you go over to 45 miles an hour, it jumps up to very likely a person's going to die being hit by a car going 45 miles an hour, regardless of age. It goes from like 55% up to 83%. And it's just important to realize, what we're dealing with, particularly around schools. When schools are posted at 25 miles an hour, there's a reason, because it allows time for people to react. When people are driving faster, their cone of vision really narrows, and they just don't see things, and let alone being hit by a car that's going that speed. Part of the presentation at the WRCOG training, we were able to convince them to use Harrison and give us some photo sims. This is just to give you some ideas. This is 65th Street looking west, just the other side of Scholar. This is the existing street the way it looks. We have several of these streets in the city, this pointer works, where we have travel lanes right next to the curb. For example, on Harrison, we have a 45 mile an hour speed limit with a travel lane and a sidewalk next to a curb. Very uncomfortable to walk with cars going 45 miles an hour right next to you. So that's one of the reasons on the 3 streets, Harrison, 65th, and Scholar, these streets were selected. They're just not very pedestrian friendly. One of the concepts they gave was to keep the 4 lanes and to do a formal bike lane with a buffer on each side. So you've got this buffer to create some separation between the bicyclists and the motorists. And they did that by narrowing the lanes, and there is quite a bit of width out there. And we're really glad they did this work for us, just so we can see the concepts. Okay, and here's another concept. This is where they add parking back in. Next to Harada Park on both sides of the street, they have a bike lane. This little buffer area is it's placed on this side of the bicyclist because that's where people open their doors into that area. And so this makes for a much easier for people to commute and ride their bikes in this area. If there's no cars parked there, they can certainly ride to the right of that line also. And another concept, this is where they add the parking on the south side of the road. They have the bicycle lane, they have a buffer for the basically the door zone, then they have parking. And on the north side, they just have the bike lane and then a buffer. And these with the bollards, they loosely consider this a class 4 protected bike lane, but I don't believe those bollards really provide a lot of protection. But it allows for more separation and motorists are more aware. And now, as soon as you go to this, where it's basically we've gone from 4 lanes to 2 lanes, and the first comment that we get is, well, you're losing a lot of capacity to the street. The reality is this street, for example, has a lot of excess capacity. When you do this and you go from 4 lanes to 2 lanes, you're automatically organizing the traffic. You know where the traffic's supposed to be. You have cars that are in the through lane. If they want to make a left turn, they're in the left turn lane. If they want to make a right turn, they get in what would be the right lane. And so the cars become very organized. And accidents have been shown to reduce. And actual traffic volumes in situations like this, it does not reduce the traffic volume. It reduces traffic volume very little, as long as you're maintaining right turning pockets and left turning pockets. This is a fairly typical type of, they call them road diets, but lane reductions or complete streets that you'll see in many cities that's starting to occur. And then there's this concept. You've got 2 lanes on the south side going each direction for the bicyclists, and you have a parking lane also along the south side. And then you have the 2 lanes with left turn pocket, and you have right turn pockets. This is an intriguing concept, and I really like it, but the problem is as soon as you come to intersections, it gets very confusing. And you have to provide lots of notification, because if cars are pulling out, say down the street, cars are pulling out from the development, they normally, if they wanted to make a right turn, they normally wouldn't be looking to their left. Well, they would look to their left, but they wouldn't be worried about bicyclists coming from their right. It's just a lot more work to get the bicyclists and the motorists to recognize and be recognized at the intersection and provide traffic control without additional traffic signals or other controls. And if a bicyclist wants to make a left turn, then he runs into problems crossing other traffic. If you can picture this stop sign intersection, the bicyclists are coming eastbound. If they wanted to make a left turn and you had a motorist sitting there, I mean, the question is who has a right of way? So there's a lot of issues with this type of layout. Okay, we'd like to jump real quick to it's just a complete streets primer PowerPoint. And I've kind of whittled this down, so hopefully it's not too long here. Complete streets, basically they're streets for everyone, no matter who they are, how they travel. They're safe, comfortable, and convenient. Lots of examples here, pedestrians. 66% of Americans want more transportation options, so they have the freedom to choose how to get to where they need to go. 73% feel like they have to drive no matter what, and 57% would like to spend less time in the car. And I don't know if this was taken in Southern California. Those numbers may be a little bit higher. 59% want improved public transportation, and 38% feel like we need to build more roads. So almost all trips that we take, about 50% are less than 3 miles, and 28% are less than 1 mile. And of those trips, the majority of the time, they're driven. 60% of the time they're driven. Those trips are less than 1 mile. Every trip starts and ends with walking. And this just kind of gives a breakdown of where people will walk. If it's less than 1 mile, about half the people will walk to church or school. 3 to 4 miles, 1%. I mean, it really drops based on distance. I think a lot of people don't understand complete streets. 47% Americans say it's unsafe to cross a major street near their home. 54% of older Americans living in hospitable neighborhoods say they would walk and bike more often if the environment was built such. And 56% express strong support for adopting complete street policies. Our general plan actually adopts complete street policies and has language. Millennials want complete streets and other transportation options. More than 40% of pedestrian deaths, in this little bit older data, occurred where no crosswalks were available. I believe there's about 40,000 pedestrian deaths a year in the United States. Incompletes are unsafe for pretty much everybody, but children, we see that in our data, older adults, low-income communities, these people of color. Whoops, what happened? Streets are inadequate, no sidewalks. And we're very fortunate in this community. Most streets have sidewalks, unsafe for people on bicyclists. Traffic jams on arterials, very common appearance. There's not places to wait for transit. And fortunately in our community, most of our intersections have handicap ramps. They're really, a lot of streets are designed just for motorists, not for pedestrians or for bicyclists. Here's a picture of the enhanced crosswalks, a little bit different style than the ones we were installing, same concept. Here's a picture of a street that's multimodal. You've got transit, pedestrians, a place for bicyclists, place for parking. Here's your typical example with the bike lane and parking on the right and through lanes. This intersection looks very familiar to some of our intersections. Fairly fortunate having sidewalks throughout the community. Complete streets policies. Okay, complete street policies ensure that the entire right-of-way is planned, designed, constructed, operated, and maintained to provide safe access to all users. It's a high-level policy direction. It changes the everyday decision-making process and systems, and it represents an incremental approach and has long-term results. Complete Streets is not. It's not one special street project, a design prescription, a mandate for immediate retrofit. It's not a silver bullet. Lots of issues have to be addressed when you're looking at changing the streets. This is a picture of a main street through a city downtown or corridor. Shared commercial streets, these are becoming more common. Traffic circles, Southern California has kind of steered away from traffic circles and roundabouts. Protected bike lanes, we're seeing a number of these in the city of LA. Advisory bike lanes, just to let motorists know that bicyclists may be present. Modern roundabout. A modern roundabout does take up more intersection space than a typical intersection. So it's really hard to retrofit a standard roundabout. And that really concludes the presentation. 65th Street, we've ordered traffic counts for the intersection, video traffic counts for the intersections of Sumner, Archibald, and Scholar. And we'll be looking at the numbers and preparing plans, and we'll be taking concepts for restriping that street to the Public Safety Commission and Planning Commission. And you'll see it again also before we actually stripe the street, and there'll be a discussion process where everybody has a chance to chime in, and we can work through the numbers and show how things will be working. That concludes my presentation. I'm glad to answer questions.
Okay, any comments, questions?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Hey, what'd you say the number was on pedestrian deaths? You said
The what?
Number of deaths, pedestrian deaths?
Oh, I think in the United States it's about 40,000.
Okay.
And we need to check that number.
Yeah, it seems pretty high.
Yeah, but we can check that number.
And the other question I had was, you listed 5 of the main thoroughfares where there's been 21 different accidents.
Correct.
Was there a like number in other areas of the city that weren't on those major streets, or were there more or less? Do you have any numbers on that?
Those were the highest accident streets that we had. I don't believe we looked at Limonite specifically. Limonite seems like it'd be fairly high.
That's just curious. I wanted to know, like, if in total, if it actually exceeded the 21 or was less.
Right. We have the Crossroads program. It actually contains Switter's data, and it's fairly easy for us to run those types of reports. We can look into that and see how things have ranked like for the past year.
Okay, so I was just thinking if there's a lot taking place in some of the interior streets in the neighborhoods, then education's probably the direction to go to try and mitigate that.
Right. Where you've got lower speeds on residential roads, you don't see nearly the number of accidents. It's typically the collectors and above.
Thank you, Mr. Bradshaw.
Other questions?
Thank you for that presentation. It was great. With having younger kids, it is a concern, because I know a number of times that we want to bike somewhere, but we won't because of just the way that the streets are set up. So it is something I appreciate you guys doing and looking into, and something I look forward to the continued evaluation regarding this. I did just have a couple of questions just on specifically like 65th, the diagrams or the photos that you had. I know in Eastville we have a lot of traffic issues, and that's kind of the last thing we want to do is take away lanes. But as well as on 65th, you don't see a ton of traffic there. So I'm curious what the traffic count would be on if it justifies the 2 lanes, or if we could reduce it down to, or I'm sorry, the 4 lanes, or reduce it down to the 2 lanes and not have any issues.
Yeah, we should have full counts here in a few weeks. I know the last counts that we did on the street were about 4,500. That was a total daily. I mean, typically on streets like this, you can go anywhere between 8,000 to 12,000 and not have a big problem with capacity. So 65th Street is actually one of the easier streets that we can do. Harrison, you run into some problems during peak hour traffic, and particularly at the Schleichman interchange. Schleichman, the traffic signal takes away some of the green, has a certain amount of green time. And so you've got to be able to clear the cars on Harrison during the peak period. So there's a concern there, but most of Harrison looks pretty good except for that Schleichman interchange and right in front of the schools. So that's going to have to be analyzed real close. And then Scholar, south of 68 in the morning down to Citrus. Looks like we have some fairly long queues with 2 lanes at traffic signals. Currently the high school is doing the design for the Baltimore Scholar intersection. We've asked for them to do a synchro analysis for synchronizing the signals in that stretch, and to see what can possibly be done to improve that situation. But there's a lot of congestion, a lot of cars. A lot of these streets they're designed for basically 1 hour of the day. The rest of the day, they're very quiet. And so we have to really look at that 1 hour during the day and see what we can do to improve the situation, improve safety for pedestrians and bicyclists.
Great, thank you. And I hope that off of this, that we are meeting with our Sheriff's Department, coordinating regularly on how we can work together and implement to make it safe for our pedestrians and our bicyclists. One question that I had, maybe for Captain Hedge, if you don't mind, sorry to put you on the spot, but Mr. Bradshaw, during your presentation, you talked about the 2 most common violations were vehicles failing to yield to pedestrians within a crosswalk, and then number 2 is pedestrians failing to yield to vehicles mid-block. Captain Hedge, can you, for the public's benefit, can you share with us a little bit more in detail what those 2 violations specifically are, and when someone can be cited for those?
Yeah, absolutely. If I understand the description properly, it sounds like when a vehicle is making a right-hand turn within an intersection, and somebody steps off the curb or enters the roadway as that vehicle is proceeding to make a turning movement, and then collides with a pedestrian. In a crosswalk situation, vehicles are required to yield to pedestrians who are crossing at the green light through the crosswalk, and yield until they're able to proceed without obstructing that pedestrian. But also in turn, if the light is green and a pedestrian is still on the curb, they're required to wait for through traffic. So a lot of people think that a pedestrian always has the right of way, which is not always the fact. If the pedestrian enters into the roadway and doesn't yield to traffic that has the right of way, they could be considered at fault in the collision. And it's the same with entering the roadways mid-block or not within an intersection. When you have a through traffic and either a bicyclist or a pedestrian enters the roadway, when a vehicle has the right of way, that's when a collision would occur. So in that case, a pedestrian or a bicycle could potentially be at fault if the vehicle is traveling at the appropriate speed and not doing anything inappropriate. It would be the pedestrian's fault. So, and that's why we conduct the traffic collision investigations to make that determination. But if that answers your question, I believe those were the
Definitely.
descriptions that were given in the presentation.
Definitely, thank you. Thank you very much. That's all I have.
Thank you. Mr. Rush?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Craig, for your presentation. I would caution getting too aggressive in this. You know, I'm definitely for public safety and pedestrian safety. I bike with my kids, but, you know, we have to understand a lot of the photos that we're seeing or that were shown are more of an urbanized environment. We're not an urbanized environment. We're, you know, for better or worse, and I wish it wasn't the case, an automobile-centric community. Biking is great, and I'm all for some of those short-term solutions, but I'm really concerned when we start taking away lanes, not only from a traffic and a volume perspective, but, you know, we have a series of developers that have spent a lot of money in these traffic studies, and these traffic studies that were done 10, 15 years ago probably warranted these lanes, and now we're saying that's not the case. We're going to go back on that. I have a slight concern with that. We need to have separations. I'm all for parkway adjacent sidewalks. You know, I think having the curb adjacent sidewalks, it's just, it's one, it's kind of ugly. Two, it's just bad policy, you know, but it is what it is. In the slide that showed some of the accidents, I don't even see 65th in there yet. That's kind of our main focus. You know, if we're going to do anything, my opinion, I think we need to focus more on the schools. That's unfortunately where we've had a lot of those collisions, and that's not just a separation issue, and that's a whole other, you know, public safety, traffic education, you know, education of the parents in a lot of circumstances, and just driving appropriately and safely around children. So I would just caution some restraint and, you know, in taking baby steps here and making sure that we start with some of these short-term fixes, do the evaluation, see the study. You know, we don't have, to my knowledge, a significant amount of bicycle commuters. I mean, these are folks that recreate. You're not going to, you know, the baseball game with your cleats and your bat and your glove on a bike. It's just people are going to drive to the game. They're going to park. That's kind of just the nature of the culture we live in. So I like the program. I just, you know, I don't want to go too far ahead and get too aggressive here and then have some backlash. Some of these, and I know it's not apples to oranges, but some of these road diet programs have had significant backlash, I think, in the way that they've been done, in the areas they've been done, excuse me, were not appropriate. You know, they were done in very high traffic volume corridors, and they've had to go back and fix that. So I like the program. I just, you know, I don't want to make sure we don't go too far off the cliff here and wind up creating a situation that we're going to regret. So.
Yeah, I just jump in. I agree with you entirely. We are taking baby steps. For us to do restriping, we're going to resurface first. 65th is actually one of the easier streets because of the volumes. We need to demonstrate that. The way I see it on some of these other streets, we need to really do a synchro analysis and do a simulation so we can see what's happening with stacking and how the cars are moving. I think we have to work through those issues. And, you know, get public consensus and go through a commission process.
Sure. And as always, I would always, I was repetitive, I would always ask that we reach out to our partners at the school district. You know, we share this responsibility. I know we've had the discussion before, but I'm not in favor of picking up the tab for something that is a responsibility that we share. We have some responsibility there, I agree, some, you know, financial and ethical responsibility, but at the end of the day, these are their schools and school, you know, school children, and we should share the expense. So,
Mr. Mayor, I want to just add some clarity here. Councilman Rush, you're right that this is not a recommendation like Mr. Bradshaw said earlier, nor these are projects that we are proposing in the future. These are just a study. How it started is that state of California give all agencies in California to have this opportunity. It's like a grant. These people coming from Sacramento and other people other state, part of the state, and come to the city, do some review, and try to educate on complete street project. Obviously, the examples are not from here, all of them, an urbanized area, I agree with that. And we are very cognizant that before we do any of these rent reductions and stuff, we have to do the counts of the traffic. We are not just gonna overnight or maybe arbitrarily taking lanes out of the street that we have. We are thankful that we have from the county or wide streets, and it comes with the pros and cons, with the sweet and the sadness. Because when we have to redo a street, to repair a street, it's gonna cost more money. But at the same time, also causing some of the people speeding in the wide streets. So we have to be very, very careful before we do that. And thank you for the comments. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Okay. I wanted to follow up to that. Today at the RCTC meeting, actually, they were talking about the F-tip, and they held up Eastvale as an example of a city that had a project coming in 2019 related to road diets. And they were talking specifically about 65th going to Archibald. So I would also like to encourage baby steps, because I do feel we need to get public feedback on this issue. And in relation to that, some of these, the percentages in the second PowerPoint, this one that's still up there, it seemed to me that, and I could be wrong, that they were not local, or
No,
they seem national.
They're national, correct.
If we are basing our decisions, if this is brought back to us, if we could have stats that are a little bit more micro in nature, so that
Yeah,
we
certainly.
can, I'd appreciate that.
Sure.
It would help me in my decision making. But I do appreciate the presentation. It is informative. Any other comments, questions on this item? Yep, please, Mr. Tesseri.
I know 65th Street came up twice by Councilman Rush and you, Mr. Mayor, and that is part of the grant.
We have a
65th.
small grant, I think of 130,000, fairly
Okay.
small grant.
Is there any reason Schleisman and Archibald aren't included?
There were certain criteria that had to be met, and I don't even recall now. We were trying on a number of angles to get funding, and I think we had to match 50%. And I know 65th is slated to be resurfaced in the near future, so we're looking in terms of resurfacing and restriping at the same time.
All right, I was just wondering why those other three were and those two weren't.
Right.
Thank you.
Councilman Tessari, just again, a clarification. The reason 65th is picked here in this case is just it's a low-hanging fruit, and it's kind of short enough, and then the $130,000 is not going to take us to all those fancy stuff that
it's a
we
small
saw
amount,
on the
right.
screens. We're just going to stripe the bike lanes, so it's still going to remain for two-lane each directions with the bike lane, with the more defined bike lane. That's all it takes us, basically. Thank you.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you, sir. All right. We're going to be moving on to item 4.2, which is another presentation from Mr. Bradshaw, and this is on
It's gonna be
Public Works Traffic Review. Mr. Bradshaw.
We're going to let Joe do this. You've heard enough from me.
Mr. Indrawan.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, City Council members, and this is actually Public Works Traffic Review process. In 2015, staff came to City Council with a little bit different presentation, but now instead of those kind of narrative one, we have something more graphic here, and these are based on reports and complaints and concerns that have been received by staff through City Council members, through public, through school districts, through everybody basically, and we just want to share with the council tonight and also the public the process that we review, that we follow when we have requests regarding traffic concerns. One of the items is the crossing guards. We've received a lot of requests. Hey, we have crossing guards in this school. How come we don't have it in my school here? And I'd like to have one here. And so what we do is that normally we receive requests from through the school district or directed to us through parents, through phone calls, and City Source. And what we do, we conduct a warrant study because this crossing guards is not just because one school has it, the other school has to have it too. So we do the warrant study per California Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, MUTCD. It's a mouthful. It is followed in California. It started with federal, but California, as a very unique state, always want to have something special. So they have more items added to this MUTCD. So if it is not warranted, regardless how much you want to add it, we cannot tweak the numbers, and we have to deny that request. Now, if it meets the requirements, we have to approach school district, because this is a partnership program. I just want to, again, respond to Councilman Rush earlier. It is a program for our schools, for our kids. They are their schools, but they are our kids, so we have to partnership. So the crossing guards also 50-50. If we meet the warrant, we're going to contact school district officers, say, hey, we have to put a crossing guard in here. So what we do, we have an agreement with them. It's a 50-50 agreement, funding purposes, because a crossing guard has to meet certain requirements. It's not just regular volunteer parent going to go out to the street and do crossing guards. They have to go to a certain school, through certain companies. So if it meets the requirements, we're going to place that, and we're going to amend our budget accordingly. Right now we have about 10 crossing guards, or maybe a little bit more, throughout the schools, throughout the cities, and they would charge us. A school would charge us the 50% of the cost, and we're going to pay them the cost for that. So this is for crossing guards. And the next one we have is now, I just want to explain to you, if we deny the request of crossing guards, as with other denials, traffic signals, stop signs, we don't stop right there, so we don't put crossing guards. We continue our work, because our principle is 3 E's: education, engineering, and enforcement. So if the traffic warrants, traffic study engineering-wise is not warranted, is not meeting the requirements, the principle continues. So we're going to continue with the other 2 E's. We're going to continue to work with Sheriff Department, Lieutenant Martin and Captain Hedge and all the team for enforcement portion. And we're going to continue to reach out to school district for education through their school flyers and so on and so forth. So these 3 E's continue to be guiding us in all the slides that we're going to show you. The second item is the stop signs, all related to speeding again. Existing development have different tracks with the new development, proposed developments. On existing development, the request for stop signs, what we do again, we have to study the warrant, whether it meets the warrant or not. If it doesn't meet the warrant, we're gonna inform the requester that it doesn't meet that, and we're gonna continue with, again, with education and enforcement. And if it meets that, then we're gonna install that immediately, because the cost is minimal for the stop sign compared to the traffic signal, so we're gonna be able to do it without putting the budget, because we have a miscellaneous budget year by year. Now, for the proposed development, it's a different process. They have to do traffic study, they have to do circulation element study, and now based on their study, they're gonna say, hey, we're gonna put the traffic signal here, we're gonna put the stop sign there, and automatically it's gonna be part of the development itself. Same thing with traffic signals. Warrant study is required. If it meets the warrant, we're gonna put it there, but now, because again, the cost is about $300,000, we cannot just, once it's warranted, we're going to put it in there unless there's an emergency situation per council directions. Normally what we do is that we identify what we need it, and we're going to add it on the next budget cycle, and we're going to process following the California Public Contract Code through bidding process. Now it doesn't meet their warrants, again, we're going to do the enforcement and education. Now in the proposed development, as I explained earlier, the developer is going to do some study to identify where the traffic signals are going to be required, and they're going to be part of the development on their dime. The next is speed humps. We receive a lot of requests about humps and bumps, whatever they call it. And they said, well, the only way to do it is just to put the speed bumps here. So it's our standing policy in the city. We don't put speed bumps or speed humps on the public streets. Because once we put one, it's going to be critical. Of course, you don't put on major arterial. Some people said, can you put that on residential streets? Again, we don't do that because of the some safety issue and some, I shouldn't say safety issue, but also some complaint issue. It's been placed in other agencies based on experience in the past. People hit the bump with the low tires, and they hit the cars, and they submit the claim to the city. You push the bump, we didn't see that, and my car now got damaged and $3,000. So all those things we have to consider before we put that. That's why the policy always, we don't put that in the public streets. So if it is a private street or a shopping center, that's easier. We can refer them to HOA. We can refer them to the shopping center owner so they can put that in the driveways. The next is the speed limits. What we do is interesting because agencies are required, again, by California code to have a speed survey on all city public streets. We do that every 5-7 years, and we do a survey with the exception of the residential street and the school zone area. It's automatically prima facie, which is 25 miles an hour for residential and school. But now on collector, arterial, and up, what we do is a survey, and then the survey has to be identified, has to be certified by a registered traffic engineer. And then once it's certified, we have to come to the council, so the council has to adopt it by resolution. So this speed survey is going to be a document, original signed document has to be submitted to the court. So just in case our sheriff department, deputy sheriff, give a ticket to a speeder, they get challenged, they go to court, the judge has to have this signed and adopted speed survey. So we do that to update that every 5 years.
Joe, I'm sorry to interrupt. You have a question on that? I heard something in the news that the city of LA is looking to change that, the 85%, 85th percentile. And I don't know if it was something that they were pursuing as far as changing state legislation, or they wanted to do it just for their own traffic safety. How, I mean, not that I'm in favor of that, but how would we go about modifying that? Is that something that's done at the local level, or does that require state legislation?
I have to say that I haven't heard about that. I'm
Okay.
willing to study that and report back
Yeah,
to
it
you.
was Councilmember Mitch Englander had proposed it. I think they introduced a resolution to support it.
Okay.
So I don't know. I was just curious.
Yeah, I'm willing to find out about that,
Okay.
Councilman Rush. Okay.
I'll see if I can
Anyway.
dig up the article and send it to you.
Sure, yeah. This must be something very new that we,
Yeah, it's like
we
a week
just
old.
learned, yeah. So what happened is that if the 85th percentile of this speed, say 53 miles an hour, by law, we can go up to the nearest 5. That means we can go up to like 60 miles an hour. Okay, but now, unless there is some other things that would prevent that, like school or whatever, not school, I mean, it's geographically, there's a hump on the street, there is a little curve, we can keep that at 53, or maybe we can go down one notch, which is, every notch is about 5 miles an hour. So we cannot just saying that, hey, I don't like the street, it's too fast, and there is no accidents, but I just don't like the speed on the street, just lower that to 45 miles an hour. We cannot do that. So we have to do, follow the code, and even the time that the survey is taken has to be a certain day, cannot be in the weekends, it's got to be a certain day to represent the normal traffic in that road, the number of traffic, how many cars are going to pass in that area. So all these guidelines are set by the California MUTCD according to the federal code and vehicle code. The next one, what we do is a roadway maintenance. I'm going to go back to other miscellaneous speed. Roadway maintenance, we just recently finished our slurry seal. We have a lot of concerns and reports from public, from residents, and we try to answer that as much as we can. But from the hierarchy, the worst case scenario is total reconstruction. If we have a roadway that is completely broken up and cannot be repaired, beyond repair, what we do is just we totally reconstruct the street, or remove and repair basically. We grind, we remove this pavement by 12 inches maybe, or whatever it is, and put the new base, put the new asphalt. That's the most expensive one, of course. And then we did that one time to River Road between Hellman and Hall in that area. We remove and replace that area. So we try to avoid that because of the cost. So every so many years, what we're trying to do is that we try to slurry seal. But before, if slurry seal doesn't work, we grind and overlay. What we do is that if the cracking is so much that slurry seal will not help, normally arterial and up, we grind about 1.5 inches thick, and either we reuse that asphalt by remixing that, or we're gonna bring the new asphalt, put another 2 inches. So the coat's gonna be really smooth like a new street. But people didn't know that's only 2 inches been replaced. So this grind and overlay, the cost is not very much, but the most cost effective that we can see is slurry seal. This is mostly in residential street that we do. It just recently took place. There's a minimal amount of cracking, so what we do is that we crack seal that first. We wait for a couple of days, a week maybe, and we come back with a slurry seal. That would lengthen, would extend the life of the street by about 5 to 7 years. So if we can continue doing that every 5, 7 years, we don't have to do all the reconstruction or the grind and overlay even. And of course, after rain and after so much use of the street, it's always potholes, and we're gonna fix that and with hot mix. But if we have too many potholes, that city is a good candidate for you to grind and overlay in the next year or two, because potholes usually don't last that long. Usually after so many use, 6 months, whatever, it's gonna be pothole again. There's gonna be reoccurring there. So these are roadway maintenance that we have. And the next one is actually success stories. We received a report from a community about a couple of streets. One is actually Celebration Drive and Peach Blossom. Peach Blossom is, I know if you can see here, it is between 65th here and the Scholar Way, all this curved street. Maybe more than 50% of the street has homes fronting that, like residential. People are speeding here. People cut cross here to go to the school in this area, and it's convenient for them. And so we work with the deputy sheriff and the enforcement. We put the radar speed sign, the board, and it continues to happen. So what we did during the last slurry seal, after the slurry seal occurred, we put the double yellow line, solid yellow, all the way from end to end. And thank God, actually, after we did the striping, we removed the radar speed sign. It's been happening for about 4 weeks, or 5 weeks, or even more, and we haven't received any more report from the residents. We're going to continue to monitor this, as I mentioned in the meetings prior. And this, I think, is success stories. And the other one is Celebration Drive. This is Hamner Avenue. And the end here is a homecoming, and it belongs to Lewis Group. And we have this road, Amber Hill, and coming down to, I forgot the name of the side street here, but this is Celebration all the way to the end. So there's a gate where homecoming starts. So people usually, as soon as the gate opens, they will speed all the way, and then we have received a lot of complaints. We had a meeting with residents. We did the same thing here. We add double yellow lines. We add slow, 25 miles an hour legends on the pavement on both directions. And I receive no complaints so far, and again, we are grateful for that. So these are the areas that we are proudly reporting to you, Council, that we've been trying to do the best we can by education, working with the residents, by enforcement, working with the Sheriff Department, and we have achieved something. This is the sample. This one is the picture of Celebration Drive. We put that slow sign, 25 miles an hour, and all this double yellow with the RPMs, raised weapon markers in the center. That concludes my presentation tonight, and I'm available to answer any questions you have.
Excellent. Thank you, sir. Do we have any public comments on this?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. We received one public comment card from Christopher Folger.
Okay, excellent. Sir.
Good evening, everyone. I actually wanted to talk about road acts. I got the agenda items confused with 4.1. Anyway, I think safety is an issue that needs to be addressed as far as bicycle accidents and things like that.
Excellent. Thank you for your comments, sir. Okay, do we have any comments or questions?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, you guys have been doing a great job of staying on top of the roads. I think our roads are far better than all the surrounding communities around us, and I appreciate that. And I would encourage residents, if you see any issues, potholes or any pavement issues, use your eCitizen app and get it into us so that we can address it, so we can keep our streets looking good. So thanks for the good job that you guys do.
Absolutely. Concur. Any other comments, questions? Yeah, by all means.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Joe, can you clarify just what I know a number of times you mentioned a warrant study. Can you just clarify, just for the public's information, as to what a warrant study really is?
Yes, warrant study is if the study has to be proven whether either a stop sign, a signal, or a speed, or not a speed, signal and stop signs are indeed warranted at certain locations. So the criteria, one of them, without going through all the details because it's all the quite details. For example, for the crossing guards is another one. We have to measure. We have to a certain day of the week, a certain time at the peak hours in the morning and in the afternoon. We have to do actual counts of how many kids would cross at certain intersections. And during that crossing, during that time, we also count the number of vehicles making a turn at that crosswalk. Now, if the number, we have a diagram. I should have brought that. I apologize. If the number of the turning cars and the number of children crossing at the intersection are not meeting the requirements that is a guideline in certain roads, in certain streets, they are not meeting the guidelines. So we cannot put the crossing guards in there. We try many different ways, and we talk to. It's not that we want to cheat, but we try to talk to the school district, say, hey, what can we do here to improve this? And they said, okay, certain time of the year, there are more schools, there are more kids, I think between tracks, and there's certain track that would produce, I would say, more kids on the street. Why don't you do the counts at that time? So we follow that. We don't do the counts during minimum days, for example. So because those are going to skew the number, and of course, it's, we are not going to be able to meet that requirements. So yeah, those are the warrant studies basically, and the same thing with traffic signals. And I just want to report to you, Mayor Pro Tem, we are doing a count by video at 65th and Sumner to see if a left turn is warranted. Now, we have another guidelines that says if the streets in the intersection in the city of Eastvale, all of them has a left turn, protected left turn, PPLT, I guess, protected permissive. That may be one of the factors we can consider to put that. So the study is being done right now. It's going to be completed either this week or next week, and we're going to review that to determine what we can do the next step on that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Rush, any comments, questions? Nope. Okay. Thank you very much for the presentation. All right, that concludes item 4.2. Our student liaison report, not happening. I understand that our student liaison, Oscar Zuniga, is actually receiving an award tonight, so can't be here. But we are moving on to item number 6, and that is public comments. Any member of the public may address the council on items within the council's subject matter jurisdiction, but which are not listed on the agenda during public comments. However, no action may be taken on matters that are not part of the posted agenda. We request comments made on the agenda be made at the time that the item is considered, and that comments be limited to 3 minutes per person. Please address your comments to the council as a whole, and do not engage in dialogue with individual council members, city staff, or members of the audience. Mr. Aguilar, do we have any public comments?
Yes, we received 2 public comment cards, the first one being from Ray Hernandez.
Okay. Mr. Hernandez.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council members, staff, and members of the audience. My name is Ray Hernandez. In reference to minutes of the regular meeting of the City of Eastvale Council meeting dated February 11th, my view, politics came into play rather than verified facts. A 2-2 vote is not a majority vote. It seems to me, after reviewing the facts relating to this issue, safety was the main concern relating to the removal of the blue smoke tree. However, City Engineer George Alvarez summarized the facts in the staff report and presented a PowerPoint presentation. All questions directed were answered, proving no safety issues prevailed. 9 residents spoke in favor of keeping the tree. Only 1 spoke against it. Sometimes, and I'll say sometimes, elected officials mistakenly believe that their primary function as a manager is to give orders as a duly elected representative of the people, that they are now the bosses. And their dictates should be accepted and followed by everyone without question. When concerned citizens dedicate their time to bring forward constructive commentary only to find their efforts met with disingenuous answers, it not only undermines a basic principle of good management, but also the morale of the community, and the credibility of its government. Mr. Busma asked for a waiver to allow him to keep his tree in place. The question I have, did this issue go to the Planning Commission for consideration before a vote was taken? Tonight, this council has the opportunity to right a wrong and make a difference. Please place this subject on the agenda for future consideration and discussion. Good evening, gentlemen.
Thank you, sir. You said you mentioned we had a second?
Yes, our next public comment card was received from Justin Dewell.
Okay. Mr. DeWale.
Mayor and Council, Justin Doyle from the Office of Assemblymember Supreme Cervantes. I first wanted to address a couple questions I received from the council last time in reference to the Assembly Members Bill number 80, 1994. This bill is pertaining to requiring county jails to notify the California Department of Justice when registered sex offenders are admitted or released from their facilities. One question came from Mayor Lormore about whether or not the bill stipulates that the state will provide the necessary funding to the local agencies in order to implement this policy. And the answer to that question is yes, the state, the bill does stipulate that the state will provide the necessary funding. And the second question came from Councilmember Tesseri, asking whether or not the bill would also apply to undocumented immigrants, and the answer to that question is yes. The bill will apply to all sex offenders regardless of immigration status. So just wanted to clarify those things, and then secondly, wanted to update the council. Another one of the Assembly members' bills passed in committee this week, the Assembly Revenue Taxation Committee, that is AB 1904. This bill is pertaining to providing tax cuts to businesses that employ apprentices. A tax cut of up to $10,000 per year. So that passed that committee on a unanimous vote. And that's my update. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay. So no other public comments received. Moving on to item 7, and that is our consent calendar, items 7.1 through 7.10. All matters on the consent calendar are considered routine and are to be approved with one motion unless a council member, staff member, or a member of the public requests separate action on a specific item. Mr. Aguilar, has any member of the Eastvale staff or any member of the public requested to have any items pulled?
We've had no requests.
Okay. Any members of the council wish to pull an item?
I don't, but Mr. Mayor, did you mention 7.1 through 7.10?
That's what, no, it's,
I
I'm
just wanna-
sorry, my script is 7.4. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
7.1 through 7.4.
I would
And
move.
Second.
We have a first, we have a
I'd
second.
move 7.1 through 7.4.
Okay. Mr. Aguilar?
Councilmember Rush.
Aye.
Councilmember Tassari.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Rigby.
Aye.
Mayor Lormore.
Aye.
Motion passes 4-0.
Okay, moving on to item 8, public hearings. We have 2 public hearing items tonight. If you would like to speak on items 8.1 or 8.2, please complete a blue speaker's card, which you can find in the back, and present it to the clerk, who will call you up when the public hearing has been opened. Why does this say? So we're going to start with item 8.2, and that is project number PLN 17-20013 South Milliken Distribution Center Development. And this is being submitted by Kanika, or,
I gave Kanika the night off.
okay, and Mr. Norris.
Yeah, Eric Norris, your planning director. Yeah, very briefly, Mayor and Council, we're nailing down some last-minute paperwork to do with the environmental analysis for this project. It's not quite done yet. Will be done by the 28th, so we would request that the council continue this item to that meeting, and we'll have a complete staff report and presentation for you then.
Okay, excellent. Do we have any public, well, we're going to open the public hearing now. The time is 7:54. And do we have any public comments on this item?
We've received no public comments.
Okay. We are going to continue this item until our next meeting. All right, we don't need a vote on that this time? Yes, we do. We are going to vote.
Sorry, I'll second the mayor's motion.
Just to to clarify, the motion has to actually specify the date you're continuing it to, so move to continue to the meeting of March 28th.
Yes. To move to continue this item to March 28th. We have a second?
Second.
All right. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Tassari,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Rigby,
Aye.
Mayor Larimore.
Aye.
Motion passes 3-0.
Okay. We are moving now to item 8.1. And in item 8.1, this is project number PLN 17-20041. This is the conditional use permit for the sale of beer and wine for off-site consumption at the 99 cents only store. And who are we going to have speaking on this
Well,
tonight?
I'll start, sir, but
Okay,
I don't
Mr.
think you've
Norris.
heard from Siri Champion, our assistant planning director, so I thought I would give her the chance to talk to you tonight and give the
Excellent.
presentation. So this is an appeal of a planning commission decision to approve a conditional use permit. This was brought to the council at the request of the council. You voted back in January to do this. So with that, I'll hand it over to Siri. She'll give you the background and staff's analysis, and at the end of that, we'll be prepared to answer any questions.
Excellent. Thank you, sir.
Eric, would you pass the clicker? Thank you, Mr. Norris. Thank you, members of the council. I'm pleased to be making my first presentation to you tonight and look forward to your questions at the end. As Mr. Norris stated, before you, you have an appeal. Council requested appeal of a conditional use permit for the sale of beer and wine sales. Just want to remind you that this is not a review of the Planning Commission's decision. This is a decision unto the council itself. In the presentation today, I'm going to cover 3 main areas. First, I'm going to give you some project information to make sure we have clear background. Second, I'm going to do a summary of community concerns and share with you some results of research that staff has done. And then third, I'm going to go over the findings that need to be made regarding a conditional use permit. And then the last thing will be covering the options that City Council has before them. So this permit is an application submitted by 99 Cents Only Store. They've applied for the permit in order to facilitate obtaining a Type 20 alcohol license from ABC. And that license would allow them to sell beer and wine for off-site sale consumption. It would not allow them to sell distilled spirits. Oops, wrong direction. A little bit of history on the project. The 99 Cents Store submitted their land use application first. Oftentimes we see the land use permit application accompanied by a CUP for alcohol sales. In this situation, we have the two of them separated. So in 2015, the Planning Commission did approve a land use application for the store that's currently underway. Subsequent to that approval, we received a CUP application, a conditional use permit application in 2017 for the sale of beer and wine. On January 17th, a couple months ago, Planning Commission deliberated over the application and they approved the use permit to sell alcohol. And then a week later, City Council voted to appeal the Planning Commission's decision. And a week later, obviously, was January 24th. So the project location, just to get us familiar with the area, is in the southern portion. I'm going to skip to this one first. Oh, never mind. I was thinking I would share with you first an overview map, a large overview map of the city, but we're zooming in right away here. So the location of the proposed sales is in the southern portion of the city, near Hamner and Riverboat, or south of Hamner and Riverboat, on the corner of Schleisman and Hamner. The operation of the store, 99 Cents Store only has informed us that they're undergoing some changes in the way that they do business. Typically, or historically, we've thought of the 99 Cents Store as a place that sells general merchandise. But over the course of time, we'll hear more directly from the applicant, but over a period of time, they've started to integrate grocery sales into their business operations. And the alcohol sales that are before you tonight are an integral component of that grocery store operation. So just in terms of groceries, the full-service grocery store includes the sale of household goods, produce, and food products. And the store is open daily from 8 a.m. until 11 p.m. Here you have we have a couple pictures from a store that, according to the applicant, is very typical of what we could anticipate seeing in the city of Eastvale. So you can see here we've got refrigerated items and frozen foods. We've got produce, we've got baked goods, spices, all the typical things that you would find in a grocery store. The new thing here that the applicant is requesting to sell is, as we've said, beer and wine. The sale of that beer and wine is also supposed to take place between 8 a.m. and 11 p.m., the same time frame of the store hours. They are not proposing to chill or refrigerate the beer and wine. However, I'd like to note that the conditions of approval do not prohibit this. And if they would choose in the future to refrigerate the beverages, the conditional use, the conditions of approval as written in the resolution would allow that to take place. In terms of location of displays, the proposal is to display on shelves and end caps, as you can see in this picture, as well as on pallets. I'd like to note the picture on the right is a photo that illustrates something that we would not anticipate seeing happen. It may be hard to see from the audience's perspective, but the picture on the right shows a few boxes that have been cut open so that cans can be sold individually. And this is not something that they would be allowed to do with the conditions of approval as they've been written. Consistent with all stores selling beverages for off-site consumption, no containers smaller than 22 ounces would be allowed. In addition, we have a condition of approval that would not allow the display of beverages in the front of the store and instead they would be required to be near the rear of the store and, where possible, visible from the checkout stands. So now I'd like to share with you a little bit of the analysis that we've done. First, at this stage, or at this point in time, there is one location in the vicinity of the proposed alcohol sales, and that is a 7-Eleven store at the corner of Riverboat and Hamner. If we look citywide, we can see that there are 11 locations. 3 of these locations, I believe 3, Mr. Norris can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that 3 of them were reviewed by the city, and the balance of them were in existence at the time of incorporation. You can see that the majority of them are located in the northern portion of the city. We've got some clusters. And to the south, we see 7-Eleven standing by itself. So in terms of community concerns, the 4 main things that we heard at Planning Commission and that we've also heard in comment letters submitted for this hearing today have to do with crime and loitering, proximity to schools, proximity to the 7-Eleven store in that part of the city, as well as neighborhood compatibility. So first, we'll break things down in terms of crime. And later, if it's the pleasure of the council, we do have Lieutenant Martin here to describe the process by which they pulled this data, and he can explain it further. But I'll provide an overview for you at this point. So between July 2017 and January 2018, incidents were reported at, sorry, I should back up. The police department looked at 3 different locations. One location was a 7-Eleven proximate to the proposed site. The second was Vons, which is in the Gateway North Shopping Center. And the third was Target, also in the Gateway North Shopping Center. 7-Eleven had 2 incidents reported. One was having to do with an individual who was drunk in the parking lot. The second was theft of beer. At Vons, there was theft of about $130 worth of liquor. There was theft of beer, and there was also theft of alcohol. At Target, there were no incidents reported having to do with alcohol, but there, you may have noted in your staff report, they had incidents related to stealing clothes and baby food. We also took a look at other 99-cent stores in Riverside that were reported to, or that, not incidents reported to the police, but ABC violations specifically. And so those 3 stores included Rancho Cucamonga, the one that we illustrated in pictures for you earlier, another in Corona, and the third in Moreno Valley. And ABC indicated that they had not had any violations at those 3 99-cent stores. In terms of proximity to schools, I apologize, particularly to the audience, because this is difficult to read from a distance. But I will break it down for you. This table shows various stores in the city and their distances to schools. Ralph's is about 1,600 feet to Harada Elementary. That's the closest that we have of all the stores selling alcohol to schools. The second closest is about 1,900 feet, and that is the 7-Eleven store at Archibald and Schleitzman. And then the 99-cent store is about 2,600 feet from Eastville Elementary, 2,500 feet to River Heights Intermediate, and 2,800 feet to Eleanor Roosevelt High School. Based on these numbers, we can see that the 99-cent store would be a similar distance to most of these and would not be as close to schools as the Ralph's or the 7-Eleven at Archibald and Schleitzman. In terms of proximity to 7-Eleven, I wanted to just bring up this overview map again for quick reference. So an important thing to point out in terms of proximity is that the city has no ordinance that it's passed and no policy established regarding concentration of stores selling alcohol. There is regulation by ABC that has to do with concentration of alcohol sales, and we're not near that in this circumstance. In terms of what we do see, other stores in the city of Eastvale are closer together than the 99-cent store only and 7-Eleven, particularly in the northern portion of the city, where we can see Target and Vons and Ralph's and others that are located around the Hamner and Limonite intersection. So here's a zoom in of the distance of the location of the 99-cent store only from the 7-Eleven, which you can see in green to the north. They are close, but as I mentioned earlier, they're not as close as other stores that we see in the city. In terms of neighborhood compatibility, there are 4 key things that were driven to examine based on the zoning code. And that's location, size, design, and operating characteristics. In terms of the 99-cent store and what they've presented, the location of the store, the size of the store, the way that the store is designed and being constructed, as well as the operating characteristics, they are all consistent with the same characteristics of stores that we see throughout the city of Eastvale. Another thing to note is that in terms of neighborhood character, the type of houses, the size of houses, the overall mixture of uses that we see in the vicinity of this particular site is also similar to what we've seen in other stores that have been reviewed and approved in the past. In terms of findings, there are 3 findings that need to be made in order to approve a conditional use permit for alcohol sales. The first is consistency with the general plan. The third, I went out of order here. The third is not located in the Chino Airport influence area. And the third has to do with neighborhood compatibility. And the reason I went out of order here is because in terms of consistency, we don't have an issue. The zoning code allows for alcohol sales in this location. Also, the second finding is black and white. This site is not located within the Chino Airport influence area. So the main finding that it needs to be considered tonight is neighborhood compatibility. And I have included more detailed language about that finding here. So the city council needs to take a look at the application in terms of the location, the size, the design, and operating characteristics, and find that they will not be detrimental to the health, safety, peace, morals, comfort, or general welfare of persons residing or working in the neighborhood. So just to summarize, in terms of that finding of neighborhood compatibility, staff has worked with the police department and visited other stores and has looked at crime. We've found no empirical evidence that crime would be an issue based on the opening of alcohol sales at this site. Furthermore, the measures in place by ABC regulations, according to the police department, are sufficient to address problems if they arise. Second, in terms of proximity to schools, based on what we've seen at existing stores, there's no evidence that alcohol sales to minors would increase if the 99-cent store begins to sell beer and alcohol as well, particularly because we don't see that as an issue at 7-Eleven. And Lieutenant Martin, I think, will share some information about students and the fact that they haven't seen an issue with students attempting to purchase alcohol at the 7-Eleven, which is near the site. And then finally, in terms of neighborhood compatibility, we've seen no evidence of incompatibility other than the testimony that we've heard directly from residents themselves. So with that in mind, we did receive comments at the Planning Commission. We also received comments here. And first of all, an important thing to note is that we received one letter that was attached with a petition that had 494, I believe, if I counted right, signatures. We had 2 letters in opposition, and we had 1 letter written in support of the application. Staff's recommendation at this time is that my apologies, this is not the Planning Commission, this is the City Council. Staff's recommendation is that the City Council approve an exemption to CEQA for existing facilities, and second, to approve the conditional use permit subject to the conditions of approval. So the final slide, or the final consideration, City Council has 3 options. The first is to approve the project with additional changes and/or conditions. The second is to continue the public hearing, and along with that, provide staff some direction, as well as direction to the applicant for work that you'd like to see us do between now and a future hearing date. And the third option is to deny the conditional use permit. At this point, staff is happy to field questions from the council. Thank you.
Excellent. Do we have any questions at this time?
The individual sales component, is that a ABC regulation, or is that something that's part of the conditional use permit? Seeing that it's a conditional use issue, what kind of sanctions would be placed on a business who violated that?
So the 22 ounce limit is what I think you're referring to.
Like a box of, like a case of beer, if you open it up and sell
the individual cans. Okay. If assuming the conditional use permit is approved, along with that condition for the 22 ounce bottle container minimum, if they were in violation of that condition, then the council has the opportunity to review the conditional use permit and to revoke the conditional use permit.
If I could add to that answer, there's additional remedies that would be available as well. Typically, being in violation of any of your permit conditions is a violation of your code, so any of the traditional code enforcement remedies would be available, whether it's administrative cites, infraction citations, or declaring the business a public nuisance.
Thank you.
I guess just to add and clarify to that, but if we were to go down the path of revocation, that would be a formal revocation process, which involves a hearing and testimony.
Yes.
Okay. Which I've been through those. It's not nothing's a slam dunk, but it's I think as close as like a court hearing that we would ever get. It's pretty involved. So.
Which is why having some other remedies, especially for a first violation or something like that, can be useful.
And I'm sorry, just to get a little bit more clarification, rather than a revocation, you could also do a temporary suspension.
I don't know that your zoning code allows for temporary suspension of a CUP. I'll defer that one to Eric.
Yeah, I don't believe it does. And obviously in any of these processes, our first inclination is always to work with applicants.
Absolutely.
If they were doing that, perhaps inadvertently, our first thing to do would be to call them and say, stop doing it, long before it would ever reach this body.
Yeah, I would hope that would remedy it. Thank you.
Mr. Rigby, any questions at this time?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you for the presentation, Siri. Can you, just for the public's information in our staff report, can you go through the conditional use or the conditions, specifically 5 through 11, just to kind of give the public kind of just what the conditions are proposed, if you don't mind?
Eric, I don't have them in front of me. Do you have them? I was having problems with my computer and I didn't get those printed out, but Eric has them in front of him. Either way is fine.
Well, since I've got this in front of me, yeah, there are a few standard conditions here about indemnifying the city, et cetera. But I think the ones you're talking about here, I'll read them briefly. Condition number 5 says the sale of alcoholic beverages is limited to the sale of beer and wine for off-site consumption. So again, no distilled spirits. Condition number 6 requires that beer be sold individually in minimum 22-ounce bottles. So that's the bigger bottles that you usually see the craft beers in. Wine sold individually must be in minimum 375 milliliter bottles. So that's a split, basically, for those who drink wine. Condition number 7, no beer or wine advertising may be displayed in store windows or outside of the store. Condition number 8, I won't read the whole thing, but says any individual is discovered loitering on the property shall immediately be informed to leave the premises by the owner, and then goes from the owner to the police department, et cetera. Condition number 9 says that all alcohol sales, cases, and displays be located in the back of the store farthest from the exit to aid in the prevention of grab-and-run thefts of alcohol. Number 10 requires a surveillance monitoring system to be installed to monitor the entrances and exits to prevent robbery and loitering, and that be maintained and the employees be trained in how to use it. Condition number 11 requires training for individual employees who sell alcohol, and that the license holder, in this case 99-cent Stores, retains all the records to be able to prove that that has happened. And that's it. And I'll just note that those are, we have, as Siri mentioned, we've done a number of these off-site sale conditional use permits here. Work closely with our police department on all of those, and these conditions are consistent with the ones that we've imposed on, say, Target and Smart and Final and the other places that sell alcohol for off-site consumption. So these are very standard conditions that we have a track record of implementing. So if you have any other questions, I'll be happy to answer that, but those are the conditions specific to that use.
Thank you. That's all I have right now. I'll wait until after.
Okay. At this time, we're going to open the public hearing.
Oh, I'm gonna wait.
Yeah?
I'm gonna wait till the testimony.
Okay, excellent. We're going to open the public hearing. The time is now 8:20. And I understand that we have, I see a piece of paper here from the applicant. Are we going to be hearing from them tonight?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Would you please come up, sir?
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Steve Rawlings, and I'm here this evening on behalf of 99-cent Stores. With me, joining me this evening, also in the back is Jeanette Garcia, as well as Jesse Allen and Will Judy, and they are with the 99-cent corporate headquarters, and they should here obviously answer in detail any questions that you may have. They're going to participate in the presentation here, but I'll get things kind of kicked off.
Excellent.
So, with that, I had just a couple of things. One, for the official record, we've reviewed the staff report. We've worked closely with your staff. I think your staff has done an excellent job about vetting our proposal and analyzing our particular situation. We concur, obviously, with their recommendation, and for the record, we do agree all of the conditions of approval, the draft conditions that are before you this evening. So with that, I do have a PowerPoint presentation. I do have a couple handout materials. And we also brought the
Please, come on up.
So one thing to keep in mind, everybody, you hear our name, 99 Cent Home Stores. That is the name. We sell grocery. We sell organic grocery, organic food. We're no different than another grocery store. What I did is showed you, this is what's important about us. A family can go out, feed a family of four, a couple gets together with another family, and they're able to put together fresh salad, same salad as everywhere else, croutons, garlic, spaghetti, fresh tomatoes, Prego spaghetti sauce, Parmesan cheese, meat for meatballs. You see the price in there for $2.99. Appetizer, which is battered mushrooms. And dessert, you see. And then the garlic bread. Okay, so that's a complete meal. That's Italian meal, complete meal for a family of four. This meal alone is $9 for a family of four. Now, if a couple decides to invite another couple over and want to sit down and have a nice dinner, we don't just sell, it's wine. This is a $25 bottle of wine that we sell for $4 to go with your Italian dinner. 2, this is ranked 4.1 out of 5. $26 bottle of wine for $5. The entire meal here would cost someone $20. So, 2 important things. A family of 4 can feed their family 2 days with this for under $20. That's what we're able to do. It's not about selling individual cans, bottles, things that you may think about. It's about allowing a family that's on a budget, that's out here in their homes, they have their kids, and they're able to feed their families without having to spend a lot of money.
Who wants dinner?
Finally, these were just a couple of interesting quotes. One is from Christine Andori, who is the author of the 99 Cent Only Cookbook, who has indicated that she's been able to buy very, very high quality wines at very, very reasonable prices. And in addition to that one, there was an interesting article by Chowhan.com that they were able to buy some wine that 99 Cent Only stores acquired from, I believe it was Ruth Chris Steakhouse. They have a bunch of private label bottles. I've never eaten at a Ruth Chris Steakhouse. I understand it's an excellent food, so I would assume that the wine is excellent quality, and we were able to purchase an overstock on that and sell it to our customers. Finally, with that, I will leave you with this, and obviously we're available to answer any questions. 99 Cent Only Stores is a really unique retailer that has developed a very, very loyal following. We have had a great track record of being very, very responsible, corporate citizen, and we're looking forward to opening here in the city of Eastvale. Just appreciate the opportunity to be able to offer a full complement of products, including beer and wine, at this particular location. So with that said, I will, just give you any more to add? Well, with that, thank you very much for our time and consideration. The last thing that I did want to mention is I did bring to you guys an article that came from People.com. I don't know if you had an opportunity to read that, but that goes a little bit further with what I was saying, that this is an excellent grocery store. That is a famous blogger. We certainly didn't pay for that article, but it was certainly an article that we'd love to share with everybody in the community, that, you know what, you can go to 99 Cent Only Stores and buy really, really high quality grocery products at extremely great prices. And I think the citizens in Eastvale will be very, very pleasantly surprised. We hope that you'll all become customer smarts. So with that, thank you very much, and obviously we're all here to answer any questions that you may have.
Excellent. Any questions? Sir?
You actually answered one of my questions, and that was regarding the security cameras and whether there's storage. That was my concern, whether it's actually recorded and saved. The other question I had regarding security is, do you guys have any policy regarding cooperation with law enforcement? I know a lot of stores like to call whenever somebody's shoplifting, but when police arrive, they're not really willing to follow up and actually go through with charges being pressed against an individual. So do you have a policy regarding cooperation?
Policy, we do work with law enforcement across all of our stores. We have a team that's set up, work hand in hand with law enforcement in the community, as well as if there is an action taken, we follow up.
So you guys will actually send a manager or an employee to court to testify if necessary?
We will send somebody from our company to testify if necessary.
That's all I have.
Mr. Mayor, I have a technical question before we get into the testimony, probably for staff, but feel free to chime in, Steve, if you'd like. On condition number 11, how are we gonna, and that's the prior to allowing an individual employee to sell alcohol, the permit holder shall provide training on the lawful and responsible service of alcohol to an individual employee. How have we implemented that in the past? How are we intending to implement it? You know, it says a record of the training should be kept on site. I know in some of these programmatic aspects, the permit holder has submitted a copy of it to staff. Is there any on-site verification? Can you elaborate on that just a little bit?
Yeah, Mayor and Council, we haven't actually felt the need to verify that condition on the other licensees in town. That's something that ABC looks at more closely, and I think we see that as something that if there were an issue, if we felt that there were problems, we would have the ability to go to 99 Cent Store or any of the other stores that we put this condition on, request those records to verify that they had been doing that. So we rely mostly on ABC to do that kind of day-to-day monitoring of their alcohol sales operation.
So just follow up to Mr. Rawlings. So if a code enforcement officer or member of city staff went to the actual location, they'd be able to pull a copy of that training upon request?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. That's the only question I had at this time. Thank you.
Mr. Rigby.
Thank you. I just have one quick question. Is this in relation to the status of the construction at all right now?
In relation to the status of the construction?
Meaning the length of the construction and how it's
No, it's
not been as fast as
No.
could be?
We've had some delays in construction, from both our side and working with, utilities. Will is my, vice president of, real estate and handles the construction handling the project.
Good evening. With regard to construction, we have, on the corner, basically, that have to be redesigned. Plans were approved and built according to plan. However, once it was inspected, everybody on site, both our staff and police staff, agreed it had to be redesigned. And so we had to stop work to redesign, and that design affected utilities underground. It looks like a simple project, but the street widening, bus stops, utilities, fairly complicated. We are underway now, and I think the rest of it should hopefully go smoothly. All the unknowns will be resolved.
Okay, thank you. Is that good? Okay, thank you. This time we're going to be opening our public comments. Mr. Aguilar, have we received any public comments on this item?
Yes, our first public comment card was received from June Lee.
Would you, I'm sorry, what was the name?
It was Gian Lee.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm Julie. I'm resident of Eastville. I moved here year 2009. The reason I moved to Eastville from Hacienda is for my family. It's, when we research this area, we want our safe place raising our children and safe place for the family. So we like the here we to enjoy. This couple of years, we saw more and more Chinese people move here. For my experience, many people are coming to ask me, they come here because our have good school here. We have very good high school here and very good middle school and elementary school. That's more people coming here. So actually, I like that store. In honesty, I usually shop here, but I really don't like to sell our house because for the children. Usually it's too close to our school. Even we said 7-Eleven sell alcohol too, but that's different. So 99 store have everything lasting for children. Children go in and go out lots. If you sell alcohol, even you sell beer, if our children buy later, what do you think about? I asked our neighbor not Chinese, all our neighbors American and white. I asked our neighbor for 20 of them, door by door. I said, you guys like it, nobody like it, everybody signed against it. So I hope everybody consider this. Let me store with water. I like it, but not alcohol. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a next public comment?
Yes, our next speaker will be John Hu.
Good evening, Mayor. My name is John Hu. And that's three things I want to bring up. First thing is too close to high school. When they talk about the schooling, they mention about the elementary school. Like if you think about the public, the kid, elementary school, the close to alcohol, we more concerned about high school. Because it's junior, senior, all you do is drinking, party. That's why. That's store too close to high school. That's one thing. And yes, 99-cent store, they provide the service for the fixed income. However, when we think about the homeless, those people, unfortunately, if they want the alcohol, they're going to look for the cheap source, which is the 99-cent store. Then you can buy all the unwanted people. And last one is, we got plenty of alcohol in the Eastville. Barnes, Blau, Albertson, upcoming Costco, Walmart. It's even, we need to cut down the alcohol, make the Eastville city the best city we can be. the alcohol, I don't think that must see that at all. That's all I have in my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Su.
Our next speaker is Wen Perry. Peng.
Good evening, Mayor, and city council members, and everyone here. My name is Wan Pan. I'm here to express my will against the 99 store liquor licensing. Israel is next to our home. Security, food safety is we value the most. From the short time, we have almost 500 signatures in the petition. You can hear the voice from the residents, the people who live here, the people who is more valuable to the city. And we want the people in here who come here. I just want to see with me to against my license store. Could you repeat that? Thank you very much. And I just want to show is I'm not on my own. I want everybody to hear our voice. The reason for against it, two reasons. First, we have so many stores sell alcohol already. I see the report from the staff recommendation. They say 99 store is not much closer than the other one block. What happened in the past doesn't mean it's right. It doesn't mean we can make it better. That's one thing. The other thing, without selling alcohol, 99 restaurants still can be a great store for the people, right? And also, we know, well, 99 store have been in California 20 years, or what? I just picked up the idea from the report just now. Everybody has the idea what sort of things they sell and what sort of marketing people they attract. So we don't like the licensing in 99 store to attract this low budget people to buy alcohol. That's the kind of resource they will go to causing problem as a safety and criminal problem. So, thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Our next speaker is Betty Wu. She has time donated by Hope Springs, so she'll be allocated a time of 6 minutes.
Excellent.
Good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, and council members. I sent 500 word letters with about 500 signatures.
Thank you. Next speaker?
Hello, my name is Hope Spring. I'm the neighbor that she mentioned in the beginning.
Just 1 second. The clerk
Yeah.
has to call up in a certain order as to who's.
Yes, just to confirm, Ms. Spring, I believe you donated your time to Betty Wu.
Yes, and she gave them back. And I do have something to say, and I intend to say it.
Okay, if you're okay with that, Mayor Laura Moore.
Hello, gentle people of the council.
Just a second, please.
One second, I'm sorry. How long did Mrs. Wu speak for?
Mrs. Wu had 2 minutes remaining.
Okay, excellent. You have 2 minutes, ma'am. Thank you.
Hello, gentle people of the council. I'm sorry to make this rude interruption. I would like to start with saying that I'm happy that the 99-cent store is able to feed their families for a low price, but I don't think that $4 wine is something that people live off of. This isn't about what else the 99-cent store sells. We are not here to discuss the rights of the 99-cent store business in our neighborhood. We are here to discuss the alcohol license. It was 429 signatures that was gathered by only a small handful of residents in Eastvale. So this is only a small measurement of our distaste for the alcohol license of the 99-cent store. The presentation given by the 99-cent store mostly focused on other products, and I really like the products that they sell. However, I, along with many other Eastvale residents, do not, I repeat, do not support the alcohol license. That is all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, who's our next speaker, Mr. Aguilar?
Our last speaker for the evening is Irad Liu.
Evening, sir.
Mayor, council, members of the audience, good evening. Well, I'd like to make a couple comments about the presentation first. You see how powerful U.S. corporate is. They have all the resources. They did a long presentation and just show us that, okay, they think they can sell alcohol. That's the point. And we, the residents of the Eastville, we don't have resources for that. Okay? We cannot, at that level, compete with them. Show you guys what the pictures we have, how things are organized. We have people here organized by themselves, and they go door to door and they talk to people. But I think we have power because we're living here. We are the areas. And second, we had a presentation talking about compare the school and the store, the distance. I'm sorry, in Eastville, we have only one high school. The elementary school kids, they don't really get involved in the stores. But high school kids, we have one of the largest high schools in this area, in maybe the whole school district. Over 4,000 high school students here. I've been here about 13, 14 years ago. And I've seen how the high school built and how the kids come in here, go to 7-Eleven, when that's the only store that they get some snacks, get drinks and stuff. I've been seeing them walking over, many of them do this. Now, 99-cent store location definitely is shorter. 2,800 yards, is that what you're saying? The research? But it's shorter than from high school to 7-Eleven. And they definitely gonna come here for the snacks, for drinks and everything that they need, all the items. I don't want them to expose to the sales of alcohol, and I don't want them exposed to the influence of the people who purchase alcohol in the 99 store. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Aguilar, do we have any further comments on this item?
And that concludes public comment.
Okay. This time, we're going to close the public hearing. The time is now 8:54.
Sorry,
Yeah,
Mayor.
yes, I'm sorry.
The applicant would like an opportunity to rebut public
Okay,
comment.
excellent. Please.
kids in the community. And my kids will not be going to 7-Eleven or to 99 Cent buying alcohol. I have kids that are on the President's Honor Roll in this community. I have been involved in the community throughout my 10 years of being here. We have a strong community. We have a strong law enforcement. We have businesses that are following code, the law of what's here. 99 Cent Only Store is a $2 billion company that's been around for 35 years, and they take this very seriously. With over 388 stores throughout California, Arizona, Nevada, and Texas. And we don't have any problems as you saw from the ABC. So it's going to allow the community to be able to have healthy living products that will help them to live healthy. And on top of that, they can buy value. Not only value in the wine, but value across everything that we have within our stores. Okay, so that's what I have.
Thank you, sir. Okay, that concludes we have no more comment cards, correct? Okay. This time, all right, we're going to try this again. It is 8:58. We're going to close the public hearing, and we will be moving to council discussion. Mr. Tesseri, do you have any comments, questions?
Yeah, I think there's been some compelling arguments on both sides. You know, I respect the right of a business to compete with other businesses. I think me personally, there's kind of a branding issue. I think the first thing that comes to my mind when you say 99 cent store is things are 99 cents, which means even cheaper alcohol than what you already sell. And I think of a store like Dollar General or some of these other dollar stores. When I thought a 99 cent store is going to open, that's really the impression I had. That's what I expected. The business has definitely exceeded what my original expectations were. I think you've made a pretty good argument about the quality of the products that you sell. I've actually been into a few of the businesses since this all came up in 2 different cities, and they were impressive. However, we do have a large group of our residents that do not seem to be okay with the alcohol sales. They've also made a compelling argument. So I mean, at this point, I'm willing to agree with my residents.
Mr. Rush, do you have any comments or questions on this item?
I do. Mine are kind of lengthy, so I'll defer to my colleagues.
What is
Well, I don't want to take up too much time. It's already late, and I guess I'll go. I appreciate the residents coming out. Thank you. It's not easy to put your schedules on hold and stick around for an hour or two to sit at this hearing, so I appreciate it. Yeah, I have a bit of history on this site in this corner. I think the first thing I wanted to talk about was the 7-Eleven, and unfortunately the negative issues and the byproducts that are going on with 7-Eleven, I think, are spilling over to this site, unduly so. There are issues with 7-Eleven. It's been kind of a pain in the rear since its existence. I don't think they're a good neighbor, personally, and I get a lot of complaints with trash and rats and things of that nature. I was surprised to hear the reports. I think that's probably likely underreported, just given everything that we've experienced with state propositions and things of that nature. I drive by there frequently, and 7-Eleven is open 24 hours a day, which is a problem. I live right by the one on Archibald. I work late hours. I'll be there at 2, 3 in the morning getting gas for the next day, And yeah, there's people sitting on the curb, drinking, you know, smoking, just loitering and hanging out. I know at the Archibald one, there's probably been more incidents than the one on Hamner. They're just not a good neighbor. But I think it's unfair to take the byproducts, and I feel for the residents that have to not only live across from it, but right behind it. That site was actually supposed to be a Jack in the Box when it went through the county process, and it was that use was removed by the county staff because you didn't want to have squawk boxes and a 24-hour Jack in the Box right next to homes. The sheriff's department at the time and the county would not allow a wall there, a full 6-foot wall, to be there because they were concerned with, you know, if a robbery would take place, line of sight, people jumping over the wall. So the wall got lowered down, Jack in the Box got removed. It was a Washington Mutual originally. That's why if you go in the back of the 7-Eleven, you'll see a drive-through window there. WAMU doesn't exist anymore. They were, you know, a victim of the Great Recession. And right before incorporation, because it was zoned for that use, 7-Eleven got in there. That center has always had just a lot of issues because it's very close to the Eastville Gateway and has a lot of turnover. Again, I don't think those negative issues are anyway the fault of 99 Cent Store. You unfortunately are within the same vicinity, and I think the reputation of what's happening there is getting unfairly transferred over. I agree with my colleague, Councilmember Tessari. There's compelling arguments on both sides, you know, and it's zoned for this use. I don't think it's necessarily a reflective or a matter of there are other areas of convenience. There's, you know, as the last gentleman said, there's going to be Walmart, there's Vons, there's Target. That's all true. And unless I read the staff report wrong, we're not dealing with any issues of overconcentration, correct? So, you know, there's a difference between just requiring the CUP and an issue of overconcentration. And if we were dealing with overconcentration, I think I would have much more of a concern. But 99 Cent Only Store under our zoning code has the right to maximize their business model. I think it's a bit unfair to indicate, well, there's other areas. Yeah, that's absolutely true. But, you know, I'm assuming they went here, they're looking, as Mr. Rollins had mentioned, to completely fulfill their product line, and that's their right as a property owner, as a business owner. And I think we have, you know, some level of fiduciary responsibility to at least consider that. This is a CUP is discretionary. It doesn't have to be approved. It's not a by right application. So there's a lot of different things going on. This facility was actually supposed to be a Fresh and Easy. You don't see Fresh and Easies anymore for a lot of reasons. And so this site, where I see Pastor Marino here, where New Day Church is now, thankfully, had a whole different plan. And you could sit down with Pastor Ed for probably a day or two, and he can give you the long and short of it. But that's something that didn't come up is the adjacency to the church. And Ed, I don't know if you want to speak on it. You're here if you just want to listen. But we do have a church right next door to it. And I don't know if that was considered in any part of our analysis. So I think that's part of the concern there. If this was a Vons, and this is just my opinion, or a Ralph's or a Target, you know, or what we would traditionally think of a normal grocery store, I don't think we'd be having this conversation. I think, you know, the potentially negative reputation that some 99 Cent Only stores have, maybe right or wrong, I'm not sure, I don't know all of them, you know, is being, again, kind of transferred over to this situation. The adjacency to the schools, I appreciate staff putting that in there, but I do agree with the gentleman. You know, the fourth and fifth graders are not getting on their skateboards and going down there to the 7-Eleven. You know, the biggest concern, obviously, is the high schoolers. I just read something the other day that actually, you know, teen drinking and teen smoking is down. They did another decoy thing. You know, they raised the age for be able to buy tobacco products. That's going to be an issue, I think, regardless of wherever you put a store. We're always, I mean, kids are dumb, unfortunately. You know, we were all probably a dumb teenager once in our life. And that's the obligation, not only of the community, the property owner, the business owner, and law enforcement to make sure that those issues are regulated appropriately, and the school district too. So there are a lot of issues. I'd like to hear what my colleagues have to say, but you know, at this point, I'm inclined to support the application. I still, and I expressed this to staff when the Planning Commission approved it, I still have some concerns with just the implementation, the implementability, that's a word, with those conditions. I feel a little bit more comforted hearing, you know, the presentation today, but it's great on paper. If this is approved, and I'm not saying it's going to be, but if it is, you know, I think the property owner knows you're going to have, you know, probably twice as many residences than what's in this room, excuse me, you know, watching over your every move. And that, more than anything, more than city staff and code enforcement, law enforcement, is the biggest deterrent to trying to cut corners than anything when you have residents, you know, looking over your shoulder all the time. So that's all I have to say, unless, you know, Pastor Ed, do you have any comments on the matter? I'd appreciate it. If not, if you want to sit there, I don't want to call you out or anything, but that was something that didn't come up. And I know New Day has you know, gone through blood, sweat, and tears to get that facility on there, and we want to support them. And I want to make sure that there's no edge conditions or adjacency issues or anything of that nature. So those are my comments.
Sorry to excuse me, just you would have to reopen the public hearing for this.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I know, I'm difficult.
Yes, absolutely. We will open the public hearing up again. Pastor Moreno, do you have, can you fill out a comment card afterwards, please? Please, sir.
So, yeah, some of our congregants are concerned, and I've had some concerns. You know, honestly, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but the concerns that, say, even mentioned the proximity to the high school, right? Well, it's the proximity to the church, and we have a lot of teenagers and younger who are going to be right there. And most of them are unchurched. I mean, we're reaching them and helping them come to faith, and so they're not necessarily like, the strong moral fortitude's been built into them and that kind of thing. And if, the kind of thing that is potentially going to happen at the 99-cent stores has happened at 7-Eleven and such, well then, that could be happening behind the church building, or, on the patio of the church and things like that. And if there is, I don't know, what the research reveals, if there is even a slight tick in the crime rate or graffiti or loitering, things like that, that easily spills over to the church grounds. And that's not like an indictment of people who frequent 99-cent stores. I mean, it is the liquor thing. So I don't know. Am I concerned? I am. But I guess I'm really looking to the council's wisdom, and that was the one thing that I was sitting here thinking about, that the presence of the church right there was never mentioned in the report. Because that's immediate. I mean, it's immediately adjacent. So I'm conflicted. I don't feel like it's my decision. It's your decision, and you guys have always made, I think, really good decisions in the past. And so, I'm trusting that you guys. And I've had the privilege of getting to know Jesse, and I've known Jesse in the past. But he's not on site. He's not running the does it hurt the 99 Cent Corporation if they don't have alcohol in this particular unit? I mean, what's the real downside if the rest of the market is doing well and people can enjoy a good meal and not get liquor there? I don't know. Just probably more questions than answers.
No, I appreciate that.
Thank you, Pastor.
Mr. Mayor, I'm
Appreciate it.
sorry, I do have one more comment, maybe.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
You know, and
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
I know that this has been done in the past, and I don't know what the disposition of the rest of my colleagues are, but, you know, it is a conditional use permit. I think there is the ability, if we so choose, to add some type of check-in. I've seen in the past where, you know, that's an annual type of report that's submitted to the city council, or not to the city council, but to city staff, to police department, you know, and it's a simple review. Were there any code enforcement actions, code violations, administrative, you know, warnings, ABC violations? It could all go all the way to putting a life on the project. And I don't necessarily think we want to do that. I don't think the property owner wants to go that far, but I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, Eric, is under our ability too, is we could put a 5, 10, 15, 20, 30-year life on the project, if we so choose.
There's actually case law regarding that, and
Okay.
if you do, and cities have done it, if you do, a renewal is not given the same treatment as a brand-new CUP for an unestablished use. They're given a very deferential standard to continue operating business. So
Yeah.
it's really more like a revocation proceeding in its nature. So it's kind of a splitting hairs over what you're calling it, whether it's a renewal or a revocation. They're pretty much subject to the same standard.
Okay, yeah, and I don't want to send them back through the process. I mean, the process is onerous enough, but, you know, maybe if there's some type of check-in process on an annual basis, a report that's submitted, you know, if that satisfies any concerns, but thank you, Ed, for your comments.
Okay. Since we have opened up the public hearing, I have seen 2 hands raised since. We will take those 2. Any others? Yeah, of course. Okay. We want those comment cards. Mr. Hernandez, please, sir.
Question I have for this council is, when are you going to start listening to the residents rather than corporate America? You know, you approved the Walmart liquor license or wine and beer license at the convenience store when they open up. How many outlets do we have to sell booze in the city? We have the Silver Lakes right down the street. I know that's not Eastville, but it's Norco, and it's not that far down the street from this 99-cent store. We have Mavericks down the street. It's Norco. It's not that far from the street. So how much booze do we want on Hammer Boulevard? We closed Corky's Corner to open up 99 cents wine and beer place? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, and we have a question from the council.
Eric, I got a question. Do you know, and I know, as Mr. Hernandez alluded to, it's not in our city, but do you know, is Norco, that's just an on-site consumption
Yeah,
license,
that's
right?
different. That's,
Yeah.
that's for on-site consumption.
Okay.
So the
So there are
examples you were
2
citing
on-site.
were, yeah, those are restaurants where you go and consume alcohol there. And as I think Lieutenant Martin will tell you, that has a very different set of concerns around it than buying packaged alcohol that you take home.
Thank you. Okay. All right. Last, we're going to hear from the applicant one more time, and then we are going to close the public hearing. Sir, thank you.
All I can say is that, Pastor Ed, and I've been a good neighbor, working in the past, we try to get these meetings and so forth, and I can say that we will continue to be a good neighbor. If there's issues that are happening at your church or around, we will do what we have to do to make sure that we mitigate that as soon as possible. That's all that I can promise.
Thank you, sir. Okay, we're closing the public hearing, returning to council discussion. Mr. Rush?
Good.
Mr. Rigby?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First and foremost, I just wanted to thank the residents for being here. Like Councilmember Rush said, for you to stick it out and to be here, we appreciate that, and we know it's an important issue to you, as well as it's an important issue to us. Our job is, we are representatives of our residents, to represent what our residents want, as well as to make the best decisions for the city and help to protect the city and to make what's right for the city too. So we have kind of a dual responsibility that we have to take into consideration when we make our decisions. And I know that, knowing what I know of my colleagues, that we take this very very seriously, and we look at both sides of the residents, and then we also have the hat to put on of the city too. So we do look at both. Just because we make a decision that one person's against, there's multiple reasons why we do that, and we hope to be able to share those. Going back to kind of what Councilmember Tessari said too, regarding the 99-cent store, I will say it is a little bit somewhat deceiving. When you see the 99-cent store, I went in a few weeks ago and got 4 items or whatever, and my bill came out to $6 or $7, and I asked the clerk, how did that happen? And they said, oh, there's different items that are different priced. And it kind of goes on. I mean, this article that we were given, this author's under the assumption that it's 99 cents. In fact, it says every single thing was 99 cents or less. So I think you start adding, especially the alcohol and the beer into it, then it starts, I don't know, I think, like Councilmember Tessari said, people are going in there anticipating the beer and alcohol being less expensive and going in there to consume or to purchase that. So I think that's just one part of it. One of the concerns that I have is regarding the enforcement, kind of like Councilmember Rush was saying, concerning the enforcement of our conditions on here. One of them being the loitering. How is that going to, if that's one of our conditions on here, how is that enforced? Is that, I would imagine it's mainly complaint driven. And then what are the kind of the repercussions of that if we were to get into a revocation process? Is the city able to recover expenses that we would incur going through that process?
Well, I would let staff really respond to implementation of enforcement procedures and how, you know, you track and determine when loitering is happening and the response. But in terms of cost recovery, it depends on the enforcement mechanism that's chosen, essentially. If you take a traditional code enforcement route, you may have cost recovery options. On a permit revocation, typically you would not.
Okay. Another question I have is how does this, well, let me back up. If this was to be denied, what grounds do we have to deny it?
Well,
or do we have grounds to deny it?
So the way conditional use permits work under the law is they're called quasi-adjudicative proceedings, and they have to be supported. The decision, one way or the other, has to be supported by substantial evidence in the record. So if it's approval, you have a set of findings that you're making that are supported by evidence to support those findings. In the case of a denial, really what you're looking for is evidence to show why you can't make one of those findings. So we would need the record developed with concrete evidence that we could point to support the inability to really make that one finding that Siri pointed out, as the other two, general plan consistency and the airport, aren't really at issue. So it's the community compatibility. Based off of what I've heard this evening and what I've seen submitted, in my professional opinion, there's not substantial evidence to support a denial. So if that's the route the council wants to go, I would suggest that you actually continue this public hearing to a later date to give staff time to amass evidence to support that position.
If this were to be denied or approved, does this set a precedence for other developments in this area?
Possibly. If other applicants come before the Planning Commission or the City Council for a conditional use permit for on-site, off-site consumption, this could be used as evidence of precedent, essentially. And the evidence that you use and rely on to support a denial could possibly be then used to support a denial on a future conditional use permit, especially if it's in a close vicinity or for a very, very similar scope of use. There's always going to be variations and differences, based off the size of the overall sales area, hours of operation. So nothing is ever going to be, black and white, but the more similarities that you have between a past decision and a current decision before you, then it would have some weight of precedence.
And how does, I don't know if this would be an Eric question, how does the concentration of the ABC liquor license, how does that work? What do they consider a over-concentrated area?
My expert on the ABC is unfortunately not here tonight, but in general terms, they have standards, and they base it on census tracts. They look at the number of people in a census tract, and then they look at the number of different kinds of alcohol licenses. So in this part of Eastvale, we've never had a problem with that. But what happens when they find a problem, if they see that according to their standards there's an overconcentration, then they send it back here, and as this council knows, that's when you see a request for a letter of public convenience, which is the council's opportunity to say, thank you for the advice, but we are going to go ahead and approve that license. So the only place that we've had issues with that in Eastvale is in the northern part, and if you recall from our discussions about those applications, like Costco had to go through that process, it's because nobody lives there, relatively speaking. So you have a reasonable number of alcohol sales outlets and nobody living there. So ABC just looks at the numbers and says it's overconcentrated. But in this part of town, we haven't seen that. We've never had ABC send a liquor license back to us anywhere other than the northern part of Eastvale with a finding of overconcentration.
Okay, thank you. I think I'm good right now. I may have a question or two in a minute. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, sir. Wow, you guys are all still here. It's awesome. Thank you all for coming out tonight and taking an active role in your community. This is absolutely what our democracy is about. So thank you for the grassroots going door to door. It is, your voice needed to be heard tonight. So thank you for that. Hearing my colleagues today and the applicants, the staff report, and all of your testimony is a very tough decision tonight. Absolutely. But one of the things that I feel that I've been seeing here is the 99-cent store, as has been mentioned a couple of times, seems to carry with it some baggage. And everybody has preconceptions. The same thing I think that we saw with Walmart, honestly, concerns about, it wasn't mentioned here tonight, but it attracts a certain kind of person. No, it attracts the people that are here in town. People are not making the 99-cent store, I could be wrong, as a destination location. I think it's the people that live nearby. And the children that we're talking about, those that are going to go and steal alcohol or purchase alcohol as underage minors, they're our children. We're going to work with them, right? These are our kids that we're talking about. they have controls in place, which I think is very helpful, but part of this too, I don't want to personally, I don't think it's fair to be treating the 99-cent store, they're presenting themselves as a market, a grocery store. We can't treat them differently than we would treat another market grocery store in town. I would do the same thing for a resident that is being treated differently. I would stand up for that resident because of some predetermined association with that person. So those are my thoughts at this point. I would like to go back, see if there are any other comments from the council at this point in time. Discussion? Okay. Hearing none, I would like to entertain a motion.
I would like to make a motion to continue this item.
To continue this item. Okay. Do we have any other motions or a second to that motion?
Actually, I would move that we reverse the Planning Commission's decision and deny the applicant's application for off-site sale of beer and wine.
We have a first on that.
Well,
motion.
point of order, sir,
Yes,
was Mayor Pro Tem Rigby's motion seconded, or did that fail?
It was not seconded.
Okay.
We have another motion, also without a second. Do we have any other motions at this point?
Is there not a second on that?
I haven't heard one.
Okay.
Okay,
Well, I would then, oh no, this is getting a little bit wonky here, but if there is no second on the first or second motion, then I would move to approve staff's recommendation, which is approval of the conditional use permit and upholding the original planning commission recommendation.
Second.
Okay. So we have a first and a second. Mr. Aguilar.
Can I make a substitute motion on that?
Well,
I would like to.
We're
Sorry to
like
make
on
this.
5 motions here.
Sorry to make this so confusing, but I would like to tighten up the conditions and how they are being enforced on that, with an approval of if this does get approved.
So we could do an amendment to the
Is
motion.
this a friendly amendment? Is this accepted by the?
Depends on what the
Yeah.
tightening entails.
Of how exactly these conditions are going to be enforced, because I know as we discussed, it was very vague on what kind of enforcement and what kind of how we're going to follow up on these.
Perhaps.
And that's kind of why just to explain, that was kind of my motion to continue, was because I would like for us to talk with staff to see what we can do to tighten these up.
I know you had an outstanding question that I don't think was fully answered regarding enforcement of loitering on the site. So I don't know if maybe that's something that someone on staff could speak to. But the other issue was the suggestion by, I believe, Councilmember Rush, adding a condition of approval regarding like a 1-year, perhaps, check-in period reporting requirement. That's certainly a condition that we could draft here this evening. But if there's additional conditions that you are considering, you can discuss them during your debate on the motion and possibly make an amendment, a friendly amendment to add those conditions.
A question for Chief Hedge. Is there a statutory definition of loitering? Because that may solve the problem. You just refer back to that. I see no loitering signs all over the place, but I don't know if there's actually a legal definition of it.
Yeah, I believe I can tell you right now, I cannot quote the legal definition for loitering. However, typically when there is loitering at an establishment, we use the trespass laws. And that is usually generated by a call for service where we respond to location to enforce the trespass law, the penal code. Or we have a business establishment sign what we define as a 602 letter. 602 is the penal code for trespassing, and that gives us a authorization to without a telephone call from the business establishment or without a complaint, able to respond to the location if we observed loitering or trespassing, to contact an individual, and if we need to make an arrest, we can make an arrest because we already have a signed letter authorizing us to do that from the business.
Can we add that as a condition, that there's that signed letter?
That seems like a reasonable request to me if it's supported by.
You know, I always hate doing these things from the dais. If the intent for the continuance is to tighten that up, then I would, if it's acceptable, withdraw my motion and recommend that we continue it for 2 weeks, that the applicant and their representatives work with staff to kind of implement what hopefully is our direction on tightening some of these conditions up, possibly adding a 1-year check-in, and then we bring it back in 2 weeks, and that we continue the public hearing until then. And that'll be my motion.
Okay, so we have, I'm sorry, so that's your.
I withdrew my motion for
Withdrew the
approval
motion.
and substituted it with a 2-week continuance with everything I said.
Okay, and do we have a second for that?
Second.
He was the second, but he had a clarifier. Is that okay with you, Todd, the clarifier? The motion
Yes.
that Adam made?
Yes.
Okay, so you are the first, he is the second.
And I would call for the question.
I'm calling for the question. Mr. Aguilar.
Councilmember Rush.
Aye.
Councilmember Tassari.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Rigby.
Aye.
Mayor Lorimore.
Aye.
Motion passes 4-0.
So this item is going to be continued until our next council meeting.
So if everyone understands what happened, we're gonna continue it for 2 weeks. It's gonna come back with some revised conditions. Just for the benefit of the public, I would hope that once we get those, we can make those public. Even though the public hearings continue, we can get those out so that folks who want to review them can. If they still want to come, they're obviously able to come and participate, but that may satisfy some of the folks in opposition.
Yeah.
So it'll be same place, same time, same bat channel, 2 weeks from now.
Exactly. And that concludes our public hearings. Thank you all for coming out tonight. We appreciate you being here. All right, we are moving on to item 9, which is city council business. We have no city council business items tonight. We have item number 10, and that is the city manager's report, but we do not have our city manager here, but we do have staff who you are more than welcome to. I'm gonna take a break. Let's take a break, then we're gonna hear your stuff, okay? I think that's been 5 minutes.
It's actually 10.
There was a line over there. Okay. City staff reports. Do we have any staff reports at this time? Sure. I see a shaking of heads. Yes, we have a yes.
No, you go.
You are up,
You've got the
Olivia.
mic.
You're it.
Thank you, that was great.
You're welcome. Happy National Pie Day. By the way, if you make it out on time to stop by Boy's Pizza, it's $3 for individual pizzas until 11 p.m. Tomorrow, SCORE is hosting a monthly workshop at Newgate Church. These workshops, as you know, are free because they're provided by the city of Eastvale. The topic is a popular one. It's on basic QuickBooks online training from 1 to 3. Tomorrow evening will also be the Eastville Chamber of Commerce monthly mixer. After hours mixer from 5:30 p.m. to 7 at World Financial Group here in Eastville, obviously. It's only $10 for prospective members. JCSD is hosting their free water-wise gardening class on Saturday, March 31st from 10 a.m. to 12 at their district office in Blue Valley. National Day of Prayer Breakfast hosted by the Eastville Chamber of Commerce is going to be on Thursday, May 3rd from 7 a.m. to 8:30 a.m. at Newgate Church. There's a lot of fun events. Oh, I thought Pastor from that church was here. I was going to give him kudos for hosting all of these great things. And then lastly, as you all know, we're super excited to save the date for State of the City this year, which will be held on Tuesday, July 24th at 6 p.m. at Eleanor Roosevelt High School. More details to follow, and we're excited to share those details with you. That's all I have. I promised it would be short and quick and sweet, and that's all.
Thank you so
Olivia,
much.
did you mention the Chambers morning network meetings, the change for those?
Oh, no, thank you for that reminder, Mayor Pro Tem. So their location for their morning, business and breakfast, monthly meetings are no longer going to be held at Buffalo Wild Wings, but they are also going to be held at Midday Christian Church. And, I don't have a date in front of me for their next, breakfast, but
First Thursday of the month.
first Thursday of the month. So April 5th. Thank you.
Okay, any other staff reports? No. Updates?
Yeah, Mayor and Council, just very briefly, we have a very busy Planning Commission meeting coming up next week here in the same venue. 4 applications for the Planning Commission to consider. First one is a proposed Starbucks in the Goodman Commerce Center. They're building a 4,000 square foot building with a drive-through to house a Starbucks and potentially another use that would be up on the very northern part up adjacent to Cantu Galeano Road. In-N-Out will be at the Planning Commission next time with their development plan review and a conditional use permit for their drive-through operation. Alcohol comes up again. In the Eastville Marketplace, there is a pending restaurant called Burgerim. They make little gourmet slider burgers. They want to be able to sell alcohol there in the store for on-site consumption, so that will be in front of the commission. And finally, at long last, after working on this for a long time with the applicant, Vantage Point Church on Archibald will be in front of the Planning Commission. They're on that lot north of Prado Basin Road and just kind of south of Grapewind. So
8500 Archibald.
there you go. So we're very pleased to have that finally in front of the commission. There's been a lot of issues to deal with there, and everything's nailed down, buttoned up. So yeah, it'll be quite a busy meeting. And you've probably already seen, I think, Olivia's done a great job of getting the news out. Costco construction continues. They're going vertical now, so they are coming out of the ground. If you go out there, they're starting to build the walls. So that's a very exciting development out there. No pun intended.
Thank you, sir. Any other updates? Reports? Hearing none. Okay, we're moving to City Council Communications Committee reports. Gentlemen?
I have a vector control meeting tomorrow, so I'll update you at the next meeting.
Excellent.
Just one quick thing. We have our JCSD meeting tomorrow, but I heard that, and I don't know, Eric, if you may be able to shed light, but I heard that they're getting ready to do the park, or maybe even Joe, they're getting ready to do that driveway there within the next couple of weeks. Is that accurate? Do you know?
Yes, the driveway plan has been approved from Mayor Pro Tem, and the construction I haven't heard, but yeah, they're getting up for that. You're talking about the westerly driveway, right? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
That's it.
Excellent. Mr. Rush?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for pinch hitting for me at RCTC today.
Absolutely.
I was at the Riverside County Agricultural Conference, which was a hoot. The only thing is, WRCOG, there wasn't much in PACE program stuff, but I do sit on the Metrolink board, and there is a special going on right now for San Juan Capistrano and the Parade of the Swallows. So you can take the train down from Corona to the event. It is the 24th, and there's special tickets and prices and stuff like that. So if you've never seen the Swallows at San Juan Capistrano, I hear it's delightful.
That's true.
Yeah.
No, that is true. I'm agreeing. It is. It is delightful. Any more comments, updates? All right. Since our last meeting, last week, I started off with work in the Capitol, and then halfway through that time up in Sacramento, and then I ended up shifting gears and joined with the SCAG delegation that was up there as part of legislative advocacy in the Capitol. And while we were there, we ended up speaking with different legislators about transportation for our region, Southern California. And some were receptive, others were not. I will not name names, but I was extremely frustrated when one of the senators decided to take our 15 minutes of time and talk about his family history and not listen to what we had went there to share about. But I think it was a tactic on his part. I did see the governor, but I saw him while standing on a curb waiting for the light to change. He drove by in a carp in a pool and stopped right next to me. I looked at him, and then the security guys looked at me, and the light changed. And so that was my interaction with the governor up there. Overall, it was successful trip, I feel, and it was just fortuitous that work had me up there at the same time. So actually saved taxpayer dollars on the flight up and back, so that was great. And that work paid for that. Let me see here. Also, SCAG, we had the meeting on the 1st of the month. We had the Eastvale Little League grand opening on the 3rd, which was awesome, which was great. Let me see here. Make sure that I'm getting all of these. Had the first pastor breakfast that we have with the mayors have had in time here with the city since the city's incorporation. It was a really great experience. I enjoyed it, was able to speak with the pastors. I liked it so much that I'm going to, with the Brown Act, understanding the Brown Act, I'm going to try and open this up and have a member of the council join as well, if they are so inclined, as these breakfasts move forward, so one at a time. I do want to keep doing this throughout this year, but I'd like to bring along a fellow council member to participate. And you will be receiving invitations. Let me see here. Make sure I have all these. Over the weekend, Saturday, it was a very busy day actually in our neighboring jurisdictions. So I went over to the Healing Grove in Norco. It was a dedication, and it was in honor of the victims of the attacks that took place in San Bernardino, and they planted trees there. And it was a beautiful ceremony, and the reason that they're doing these groves throughout the Inland Empire in the cities where residents that died in the attack came from. And so one of the trees that was there was specifically in Norco residents' honor. And it was a dreary day on Saturday. I don't know if you remember, it was raining, and it was somber, fit the occasion. After that, went over to Corona, and that was the 100 Mile Club for kids, and it was a lot of fun. Got to see that happening, and what was really fun, the Corona Police Department had started a Run with a Cop program, and so the kids were running out there with the officers in their gear, and the officers at the end of it, I asked them if they knew they were pulling that duty that day, and they didn't know, but they held up well. And right, yeah, but I'm going to conclude my comment. I did do the RCTC this morning. There were some updates. That piece about the FTIP that they had discussed. The reason I brought it up earlier was they held it up as something that had already been done from the city of Eastvale with the road diet, and I was really this really happened, guys? Because we haven't seen it, obviously. So that's why that came into my comments earlier. So that concludes my reports. Any other comments, questions?
I would just say that since it's Pi Day, it's also Albert Einstein's birthday.
Yes.
and Stephen Hawking's passed away on
Yes.
Albert Einstein's birthday, which is also Pi Day. So if you think the universe doesn't have a sense of humor, you're wrong.
Was his death preceded by a big bang?
On that note, no, I can't do that. I'm just kidding. I was just going with the joke here. We are going to be moving to closed session. At this time, the council will be recessing to closed session. Ms. Vega, will you please introduce the item?
We'll be going to closed session for a conference with real property negotiators, me, for the property located at 14491 Chandler here in the city, with Verizon Wireless as the other party to discuss price and terms of payment.
Excellent, thank you. So for those of you that choose not to hang around this, we're going to be having our next meeting on March 28th, 2018 at 6:30. We'll see you on the flip side of this.
You know what happened?